Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this January 9th, 2019 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and call this meeting to order. Before we move forward with our business, I'd like to pause for just a moment and express this board's appreciation to every member of the North Carolina Public Education team scattered across our state. It's our hope that over the last couple of weeks you got a much well-deserved relief and rest from the everyday pressures of this really important work. And even more, we hope that you understand how much we appreciate your dedication and service to the 1.6 million public school students in North Carolina. You're having a positive effect on every one of those students every day, and we're delighted to be on the same team with you. And in fact, we're inspired by your example to rededicate ourselves to this work in gratitude for the work that you do each day. So please know that you have our unwavering appreciation and support. I'll now welcome our newest member of the advisory board, Mr. Christian Overton. Welcome to the board, Mr. Overton.
Thank you, sir.
Would you like to make a few comments?
Yes, that'll be fine. Look forward to serving on this board for the next few years and hoping I can fill the shoes that Miss Roberta Scott has left behind. She's a wonderful woman.
James Ford.
And I'm from Camden County in the northeastern part of the state. And like I said, I look forward to learning from everyone here and serving as an advisor and hope that we can make this board even more successful going forward. Thank you, sir.
Well, welcome, Mr. Overton. We're certain that your participation will raise our game, so don't hold back. Jump right in.
Thank you.
Okay, you bet.
Mr. Chair, if I might, just a point of history on that.
What a surprise that you're offering a point of history, Mr.
Governor
McDevitt.
Mike Easley put forward a bill to add advisors, local board, superintendent, and teachers and students were already advisors, but added those three. And I told Christian earlier that for some, you would have thought they threw a hand grenade in the middle of the room. And some of those same people are now saying what a great decision to have that voice at the table. So I wanted to say that they haven't always had that voice at the table, and but it has been a very, very enriching opportunity for all of us to have those voices at this table. Absolutely.
Well said. Okay, now I welcome all board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. And for our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board committee sessions, and tomorrow's agenda is our official meeting when the board will vote on its action items. I now remind board members that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Buxton.
I need to be recused from EISC 6, Hope Charter and Pave Southeast Raleigh's request to adopt an articulation agreement.
Okay, so noted. Any others? Well, if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It'll then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and voting on the matter. Board members, you've had the agenda for a little over a week now and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. And if not, seek a motion for approval. Is there such a motion?
So move.
Motion by Mr. Buxton. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Keenan. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Camnett?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. McDevitt?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford? State Treasurer Falwell? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chairman Davis?
Yes. Okay, the motion carries. We'll now proceed to our committee meetings, and we'll start with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee. I'll call on Mr. J.B. Buxton, chair of that committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are going to move, with your approval, SLA 3 first, and then we're going to go into SLA 1 and 2 because those relate directly to our issue session and will serve as the first discussion items in our issue session. They are action on first read items, but they'll serve as a kind of preamble to that session. So we're going to start with our first one, which is SOA 3, Advanced Courses Satisfying Graduation Requirements, a couple IB and AP courses.
Happy New Year, everyone. All the best. So in front of you, you have our policy looking at courses that will satisfy your graduation requirements, Grad 08. We have 5 new courses that have been presented to us by International Baccalaureate Organization and College Board. We have gone through our review process with our standards, curriculum, and instruction content staff here to look at the 4 math courses from IB, and our recommendation is that these courses do satisfy the 4th mathematics credit in our graduation requirements. Then College Board is sunsetting their current AP World History course and is starting a new AP World History Modern course to better align with what colleges are requesting of students, and that course will be in place this fall, upcoming fall in 1920, and our staff have reviewed that course and also recommends that that satisfy our World History graduation requirement.
Thank you. Any questions about this item?
I have a quick question,
Dr. Oxton?
and you may not be able to provide the details on this today, but if you would maybe look into it a bit. I'd be interested in knowing what the colleges are expecting. You know, how are they,
Sure.
what is changing about world history?
So what, actually, we have our content staff here who can go into further detail, but to give you an overview, what they were saying was some of the ancient history is not necessarily what they're focusing as much on in colleges. And so College Board has spent a little bit less time from 1000 BCE. Come on up. Tom is going to share with you the details, which is why I asked Tom to be.
Here's
He was like, you're messing up the ears,
No,
so
you're good,
please,
you're good.
please, Tom.
So I'm Tom Darty. I work with K-12 Social Studies at DPI. And the way the College Board is going to structure this course now is it's going to go from 1200 CE up through the present day. And so right now, the way that it is set up, it goes from about 8000 BCE through present day. So you're losing most of the ancient, the prehistory, things like that, and with the effort to focus more on modern history and the way, the sort of the why of the world today. Does that make sense? The way, why of the way things are today.
Okay. That makes me real sad.
However, what we will say is that there are many other courses in a student's K-12 standard course of study where that is touched upon, and that what the staff and all of us were discussing about how in a lot of AP World courses to though better understand those, you're still going to have to touch back, and so with the depth and complexity of that course, we felt comfortable.
Thank you very much.
And depth and complexity are 2 good words for the AP World History. 3 of my kids have taken that as the worst course I've ever seen designed. Let me get any other questions.
Just a comment, as a former North Carolina public high school teacher that taught AP World History, wow, getting rid of the study of the early civilizations and the foundation is, I think it's a mistake, so.
That's an AP course,
So just to let
correct?
you know
Not a-
that College
That's the
Board,
College Board's course.
It just doesn't matter.
so they will be developed, their plans, just to let you know, is to develop an AP World History ancient course as well. So that's their plan.
That's better.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this item?
This is James Ford out of comment, if that's all right.
Mr. Ford, go ahead.
Again, I know this is something we have no influence over, right? And so the recommendation is really just to, prove this as part of the policy amendment. But I'd just like to echo sentiment of my colleague. Although I didn't teach AP World History, I taught World History, and some of the criticism from the teaching community has been that when you start at 1200, you're ultimately focusing on what is European history, and by focusing on European history, you're conflating that with modern and almost kind of pushing African, Asian, Latin American countries to the periphery, and so it reinforces some of our notions that prevail currently. So I just want to make everybody aware that that is one of the major criticisms of this move. I know it's not within the purview of this board to do anything about that, but I just wanted to offer that commentary.
Okay, we're going to take one more comment on the course, if that's...
Sure, yeah. So just in response to that, that's absolutely true. The College Board came under a lot of fire because they originally were going to make this course start at 1450, and that would really have been European history. Essentially, the history would not have started until Europeans sort of explored the world. And because of the blowback to that, they pushed it back to 1200 to give more of African history and Asian history and Latin American history prior to European colonization. So it's not a perfect fix, but they were responsive to criticisms of that nature.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about this course satisfying your graduation?
Just a comment, I need to rephrase. I did not teach AP. Many years ago, it was a world civilization Paideia class in combinations. It wasn't technically AP, but my comment still stands. I have a little bit better ease if they're adding the early civs back in, but foundation of world development right there.
So that it's completely history.
Okay. Mr. Duncan.
Is AP doing anything to investigate the notion of advanced placement for African American history that goes back through civilization? There's a lot of research on what a serious issue that is culturally for our students.
So I will express to them your comment.
All right. Thank you for the commentary. Thank you for the background. All right, we're going to go to SLA 1 and 2. I'd ask Dr. Hsu and Galloway to come on up. And I'm going to just make a couple comments because we're going to take SLA 1 and 2 as the first part of our issue session and then continue through. I'm appreciative to the chairman for his support of this issue session and want to just say a couple things before we get going. Dr. Oxendine and I, in chairing this committee, thought it important to take a look at where we stand with reading achievement and reading in the early grades. This is a priority, long-standing priority of this board, reading by third grade. It's a long-standing priority of our General Assembly, which has shown real leadership in the past few years on this issue. We have a governor who's focused on pre-K as a precursor for this. It's obviously a top priority for our teachers and our school district leaders and school leaders. It is not, however, an area where we're seeing progress. And the recent data that we had a chance to look at over the past few months shows that in some grades, we're treading water. In other grades, like third grade, we're actually moving backwards. And so we're going to take the opportunity to take a 2-month issue session look, kind of the state of early reading in our state. Today, we're going to take a look at where we stand. The department has a pretty comprehensive presentation on what our data looks like today. We have a couple legislatively required reports that will form the backbone of that exploration. Then we're going to hear from the Friday Institute and their evaluation of our Read to Achieve program and how we are doing with that program. And then we have some representatives from the UNC system to talk about their Leading on Literacy study and efforts they are taking to improve the preparation of teacher candidates in literacy instruction, or reading instruction. Next month, we'll come back and we'll broaden out our perspective and take a little bit of a look at what we're seeing in other states who are seeing gains in reading, as well as having the opportunity, thanks to a partnership with the Belk Foundation, to bring in a couple of folks, one of our nation's best experts down at Florida State University, as well as an individual who can walk us through a case study of Louisiana's work on standards-aligned instructional materials and what teachers are actually teaching in the classroom and the supports they have. So this will all be a way for us to take stock of where we are and where we need to go. Where do we need to work with our legislative leadership on appropriations and legislation, where do we need to work with our department on next steps, what can we be learning from other states. This is a priority that everyone in this state shares, and clearly we've got a lot of work to do. So before, Dr. Hsu, I turn it to you, I'd ask my vice chair, Dr. Oxendine, who's been a leader on this board on this issue and has been a longtime leader on reading issues, to make a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton, and I echo all that Mr. Buxton has just said to the board and to the audience and to the listeners, and will just applaud where the direction that we're about to take in reading instruction, and hoping that that will lead to closing the achievement gaps in reading that we continue to see, especially with our subgroups. Now that ESSA has required that subgroups receive a letter grade, it just troubles me to know that part of the low letter grades are tied to poor performance in reading instruction. I teach at a university, and even though I teach graduate students, I interact with undergraduate students on a regular basis, and the majority of those undergraduates are teacher education candidates. And I talk to undergraduates across North Carolina when they come to Pembroke to visit or have conferences, and I'll pull them inside and say, talk to me about how you teach reading. Give me the thumbnail, the elevator speech on teaching reading. And they struggle to provide a cogent answer to that question. And there may not be a cogent answer to it, but I think we should strive to the point of feeling confident when our students graduate from our EPPs and they're going into the area of elementary education teaching, that they can crystallize within 5 minutes what reading instruction means to them. And I'm sorry to say, I don't think they're able to do that yet in North Carolina. So I hope that I expect many good things to come from this initiative. And I hope one of it is that our future teachers, K-6 especially, can say, I learned to read in North Carolina in an EPP, a North Carolina UNC EPP or an independent EPP, and this is the way I've learned to teach reading, and this is how I teach it. So that is my goal, that is my vision, and I think with hard work and the professionals that we have standing before us and the professionals of reading instruction that will come to the board over the next couple of months, we will be headed down that path. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We're going to have, again, Dr. Hsu and Dr. Galloway. This is SLA 1 and 2, which are reports that we will vote on to send to the General Assembly. We're also going to be bringing up 2 other presentations as part of this, and I want to make sure we have time for discussion at the end of it. So as we go through, clarifying questions will be important on these one, but also we're going to want all of our presenters to be part of a discussion session at the end of the 3 reports. So I'm going to make sure we move through at a pretty good pace to do that. Now, Dr. Hsu, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Buxton and Dr. Oxendine, for this opportunity. And good morning, and again, Happy New Year to Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, State Board members, advisees, and guests. We really appreciate this opportunity. I stand before you to, I really want to introduce a new member of our DPI team. It is Dr. Tara Galloway. She is the new K-3 Literacy Director here. And I just want to give a little bit of just a little bit of her background. She comes to us with a wealth, extreme wealth of expertise, knowledge, and experience. She had her undergraduate from Pembroke, UNC Pembroke. She has her master's and PhD from UNC Charlotte, something dear to my heart. She's 25 years of experience in general and special ed. She's nationally board certified for at least 20 years now. She has extensive background in reading and using data to make instructional decisions. She understands how to really take a deep dive into our data to understand really what is going on around the state. So I'm very excited to have her on board here. She has also taught, not just in K-5 elementary ed in general and special ed, like I said, but she's also taught at UNCC and Bellman Abbey College, where she won the Adrian Award for Teaching Excellence, which is the highest award given to faculty at that college. I am very excited to have her on board and to have joined us, and the privilege to introduce you to her. And she will be presenting the reports that we've been working on and the work that we hope to be doing going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shu. Wow, you put me in big shoes to stand. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, board members, and invited guests, and online listeners. I really appreciate the opportunity to present the Comprehensive Reading Plan for Achievement to you today. I'll refer to the information found in SLA Report 1 and SLA Report 2. In Section 1 of the Comprehensive Reading Plan, it is the implementation of the components of the Read to Achieve, so I will outline each of these different sections within my presentation today. Section 2 is the evaluation of Read to Achieve. Section 3 is the revisions of the Comprehensive Reading Plan, and then Section 4 is the recommendations for legislative changes. So the first section I'll talk about today will be the Comprehensive Plan for Reading Achievement. In this plan, according to the legislation, we were required to develop and implement and have an ongoing evaluation of this plan. It is developed around 6 major pillars, and the plan is attached to the report. It is many, many, many pages of these 6 pillars organized by evidences and actions for NCDPI, LEAs, the school administrators, and teachers for the ease of implementation of the plan. Following the ESSA plan, some immediate changes that were incorporated to include things that are inventive now or innovative now would be the evidence-based instruction aligned with 5 key areas of reading development and personalized learning. Those things immediately needed to be added, and our division has some additional work to complete in order to make this plan the most current and up-to-date with the research. So we're going to be working in the next few months with stakeholders across regional meetings and put the plan in front of more stakeholders to be able to make better decisions about how to move forward with reading. So component 2 is about facilitating early reading proficiency. Within this component, it states that K-3 students are assessed with a valid, reliable, formative, and diagnostic assessment. The key to this is that it's important for educators to provide the targeted interventions, but it's also important for the educators to have fidelity. So fidelity of the assessment and fidelity of implementation of the interventions. If the teachers are gathering data that is not gathered with fidelity, then really the data is meaningless and we can't make good informed decisions based on that data. So it's really important to have our educators in the field trained in both areas to where they're implementing the tool to gather the data effectively and implementing the instructional piece for the students effectively. Instructional decision-making process requires that fidelity. If we don't have that, then there's no way to make good decisions based on the data. Having this happen early on is critical because we want to do this before the achievement gap gets too wide. So if we focus on that early reading, all of the deficit skills that the students have before that gap gets too wide, it's much easier to close that gap. So if you can picture like an alligator, the kindergartners down here, their gap is very, very, very small. And then as you grow with time, the students who are not making progress stay along this track, and the gap just gets wider and wider and wider and wider. So by 3rd grade, if the gap is this wide, it's very, very hard to close that, versus if we tackled it in kindergarten with our early literacy skills, we could accomplish that goal much easier and faster. Component 3 shows us the elimination of social promotion that's in the legislation and the multiple pathways to show proficiency to meet the Read to Achieve legislation. So the different multiple pathways are shown on this visual. BOG, EOG, and retest is one of the multiple pathways. doing it, meeting proficiency by an alternate assessment is another pathway, and that includes the the Read to Achieve assessment and the local alternative assessments. And then good cause exemptions would be another pathway. So you guys are all familiar with all of these different pathways. So what I did was I took the data from 2018 and I broke it down to show us some visual pictures of where North Carolina stands with this data. So this graph shows the multiple pathways to show proficiency over the past 5 years. And we can see a gradual fluctuating decrease in the promotion by EOG, BOG, and retest, while we can also see a gradual increase in the students who are promoted by using the alternate assessments and good cause exemptions. And of course, we can't talk about achievement without digging deeper into the subgroups and look at the gaps and the opportunities that we provide these students. So when we look at the beginning of grade, end of grade, and retest data by subgroup, we can see that there is definitely a need for a comprehensive, strategic, focused effort to address those underlying issues that keep our kids from succeeding, and we need to bring them the effective interventions that will change these outcomes. These populations are often the ones that are overlooked and underserved, and so this is a closer look so that you can actually see the lines. Within this one, it was hard, all of the lines stayed together, and so I created a more spread out version that shows you. So it's a closer look of the same graph, but it's really makes it really evident to see that we need to focus our efforts on innovative strategies. We need to be very strategic in ways to equalize the opportunities for all students to be successful, not just the ones that are at the top of that graph. So you can see the blue line is the Asian population, and the white line that's not showing up as well is the white students who are white or Caucasian. And then you can see the divide. There's a definite divide of those two populations versus all of the other populations. So we need to really close in this gap and make sure that we are following these students and providing the interventions to meet them where they are and take them to the next step.
Mr. Buxton, is it possible to ask a question intermittently? My question, and thank you so much, I'm so proud that you know where UNCP is located and you probably have classes in my building. Diagnostically, in the way I think about reading in North Carolina, K-3 is heavy diagnostic activity going on in classrooms. Is there something diagnostically, though, let's say, I don't know, maybe first grade, second grade could be, I don't know what grade, any grade, all grades, that a teacher could say, okay, it's time for me now to do something differently in order to prevent the gap that we see?
Absolutely. All of the measures that the teachers are currently gathering, the DIBELS data, they can use those subtests, the subcomponents of DIBELS, to instruct their information to make decisions based on that. So you can use PSF measures, the phonemic segmentation. Typically, a lot of times, that's the forgotten one, and teachers tend to focus just on segmenting, where there are so many other skills that are involved in phonemic awareness. So knowing that that phonemic awareness is low for a student gives the teacher the opportunity to open up that into all of the phonemic awareness skills and build all of those. And that would prevent this.
Well,
so
it
what
seems
we're
like
doing
that
now
needs
is,
to be said to teachers.
yes, absolutely. And what we're doing now is building the data to show that as well. So we are digging into the DIBELS data and digging into each of the components of that and coming up with ways to predict this not happening, so that we can catch it early. That's what we have to do, is catch it early. Once that gap is so big, it's very, very, very difficult to close. But if we can catch it early with those early measures, we can definitely make a difference with the students. So there are already things in place right now as we speak in the schools. It's just a matter of knowledge, providing the teachers with the knowledge, providing the teachers with the tools that they need to be able to meet the needs of those students. Resources, time, instructional time. A lot of teachers complain that there's not enough instructional time. So that's another piece of it.
That's the role of the principal.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Right. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank
Okay.
you so much.
Very good.
Dr. Galloway.
Yeah, stop me anytime. So the next slide shows us the North Carolina alternate assessments. And when I broke down the data for the alternate assessments, when we look at this, we can see the students who demonstrated proficiency. It's almost a complete inverse of the previous slide. So the students who were doing alternate assessments by subgroup, the Asian and the white that were at the top of the other one are at the bottom of the alternate assessments. And all of the others are stacked very much the same. So it was very interesting to me to see that inverse relationship within these two assessments. With good cause exemptions, it became even more evident to me that we can see with this an increase of more than 50% in every single subgroup area, except for the Asian population. So I broke it down a little bit. This is the exact same slide, but I made it bigger so that you could see the difference between it. And this is just the closer look to visually see the huge amount, the increase of good cause exemptions that are being used to pass students in every subgroup except for the Asian. And even they have increased. It's just not, it leveled out. It increased and then went back down. But over 5 years, every other population has doubled. So breaking down the data shows us a lot of information. And digging into the DIBELS components will show us even more information. So I'm excited to get that data and be able to do these types of analyses with that data to show the same things and help teachers make these decisions. Because these all are assessments. Every one of these assessments that I have shown you are assessments that take place after the learning cycle is over. We can't do anything about it at that point. But with the formative assessments, we can do something about it as the students move along. So it's really important to have that data using the DIBELS measures so that we can inform teachers of how to make those decisions. We want to do it before the learning cycle is over. So component 4 is about successful reading development for retained students. And you all know that students who are retained can be placed in the transition class, and they receive evidence-based interventions that are implemented by a teacher with outcomes, demonstrated outcomes in reading. In SLA report, it was either 1 or 2, there is a graph that shows, or a table, that shows all of the interventions that were reported by the LEAs. I really want to take a closer look at what LEAs are choosing. I know that everybody has local control, but I think that providing information surrounding what are good interventions to use with these students would be very helpful to LEAs just based on the table that they presented, because a lot of the interventions that they reported using are really just good strategies to use in the classroom that should be used with all students, not just these students that we need to target. So these students really need that targeted strategic intervention that really moves them and increases their achievement, not just the things that we would use with every student in the classroom, the core supports. So as a component of, as a part of component 4, we also have reading camps. And reading camps have shown over time that we really need to work a lot to make these reading camps something that is valuable for students. So our team is working very hard right now. Currently, we have online the Live Binder that helps, and it gives some examples. And we are working on a module that's going to really provide examples and videos and support and templates for the LEAs to use. And we're also creating having a reading camp summit. I'll talk about those things as the next steps, but component 4 contains the reading camp instruction. And then, of course, the 90-minute block of instruction that is very much needed for our students. Spending that quality time in core instruction is critical for our students. Component 5 is the notification requirements to parents and guardians. And this is about providing the notification that the students are not performing the proficiency level that they need to be achieving. And so teachers are doing that through the Home Connect with DIBELS currently. They're also doing that with lots of parent conferences and meetings that they have with the parents to inform them of their abilities and their proficiency. Component 6 is about accountability measures. And it states that there will be a uniform process, there's a uniform template, and that districts will report through an electronic system. And we've worked very closely here with the accountability team, and they have processes in place to gather all of this information, which I very much appreciate. So section 2 of the report focuses on the evaluation of Read to Achieve and the parts of the comprehensive reading plan. So I wanted to point out, this is a table that you've already seen before. It was in another report earlier in the year, and it's also in the other report that I submitted. But it points out that 56.3% of our students demonstrated proficiency on the BOG, EOG, or retest, and 45% were on the alternative assessment. The key thing to this is that there are 15.5% who were retained. And those students who are retained are the ones who receive those interventions that I talked about earlier, and we need to make sure that those are tight. So looking further into the data, we looked at the year before, the students who were in 3rd grade in 2017, and tracked them the following year. And so this shows us that the students who take the retest and the alternative test and the Read to Achieve assessment, the majority of those students are not proficient the next year when they take the EOG in 4th grade. So that shows me that we really need to give the teachers the tools that they need to tighten up on the instruction and focus on good reading instruction, basically, and provide them the support that's necessary for that. This is another slide that shows us that at the end of 2016, these children were tracked the next 2 years, and again, those students who were retained fell in the level 1 and level 2 category the following years. So this is not the trend that we want our students, any of our students, to fall on. So we want to focus on early literacy and make sure that these numbers change. Section 3 is about the revisions to the comprehensive reading plan. In this part, we had to receive feedback from stakeholders, and so our plan was put in front of regional meetings with our regional consultants, and at Mastery Literacy trainings it was shared, and then at a July meeting of the Reading Commission it was shared. And so at all of those opportunities, people were allowed to give feedback and changes and additions and deletions to the plan. Additional work, like I said earlier, is going to be done with the plan. Additional updates. There is a lot of research that has improved reading outcomes for students that we need to probably include in the plan. So moving forward, we'll get more stakeholders involved and literacy leaders here within the agency involved as well. Section 4 is about the recommendations for legislative changes. Currently at this time, we are not pursuing legislative changes. We are in the process of collecting more data. We are focusing our efforts on more strategic efforts to change the outcomes, and we're making recommendations basically for revisions in implementation at this point. So looking at collaboration with teacher prep programs, working hand in hand, trying to provide the beginning teachers support, and those teachers even before they get into the classroom, working together with the higher ed to make sure that they are prepared, and that we're creating specialists in literacy instead of generalists in literacy. No one said it better than Dr. Hsu when she said that to me, and that has really resonated because that's what we're doing. We're putting teachers in the classroom who need more knowledge of teaching reading, and we need to do a better job of doing that through professional development, through higher education, through every avenue that we can possibly explore to make sure that our teachers have the tools on their tool belt that they can pull out to use with these children.
I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Galloway, if you could talk a little bit more, maybe if you don't have the details today, you could bring it forward.
Absolutely.
As we continue this discussion, exactly what is your vision or your plan to get with EPPs and work in teacher education programs with reading?
We have talked with the Wolfpack Works program at NC State, and they actually have created a coalition And they are bringing the schools together at this point in the summer, is that right?
Is that right?
I believe so, yeah.
And we're going to have a chance to hear about that a little bit more when Dr. Graham comes up. But let's circle back to that point when we've had,
There are efforts in place
UNC
to make
folks.
that happen already.
All right,
currently,
great.
that's a really
as we
important
speak.
question.
Yes, great question.
Mr. Buxton?
Go ahead. Yes, Ms. White.
Yes.
While we're on this slide for focus on early intervention, instruction, and parent involvement, we talk a lot at this table about more at 4 and pre-K,
Right.
which is very different from child care subsidy dollars. Both are state dollars. And so it seems to me that we ought to be having a discussion with our partners who receive, are able to receive child care subsidies, and that if from the governor's office and from this office that our focus is on making sure that children are ready and prepared to learn before they get to kindergarten, that we ought to be requiring some responsibilities in those daycare programs to use those state dollars to letters, numbers, phonics, to get the children prepared. That's double bang for our buck. It's allowing parents to go to work so that they can provide for their children, but at the same time, it gets them prepared. And I'm not sure that I've ever heard that discussion about how we can leverage those dollars. Can you?
I will say this, that the data that we're digging deep into and what we're going to be picking apart, from a very high level right now, what we see, there are some things that we're seeing that children do not have in 3rd grade that we should be building in our preschool years. So that information, once we finalize this data dive that we're working on, we will be able to take that to NC Pre-K, to our pre-K counterparts, to DCDE, as well as to the Birth Through Kindergarten Higher Ed Consortium, and to our community college system. Because there are things that we are going to learn a little bit deeper that I think, getting to your point, we're looking at, where does this begin? This begins before kindergarten, and some of these skills and some of these practices. So what are we doing in higher ed? What are we doing in professional development, in early education, early childhood, that we're able to build the capacity of these teachers? So I appreciate that comment, and because that is something that we are thinking about, and that is definitely something that we're looking at doing moving forward, especially with the Birth Through 3rd Grade Interagency Council that I sit on, I'm co-chair of. That this information will be taken to them and say, here, this is what we're seeing. How can we work together to start building a stronger capacity in these early childhood programs too? Completely agree with you, yeah. So that is thoughts going forward.
And next month, we're going to have the Foundation for Early Childhood and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading come talk and focus on that level of the system.
Great.
Impact on reading, so we're going to revisit those issues.
Yeah, very good
Dr.
thoughts.
Galloway, go ahead and finish.
Okay.
About 5 minutes.
Okay. The other parts of our recommendations include supporting LEAs with reading camp challenges. This has been a huge challenge, and we really want to provide the LEAs the support, the model, the guide, every resource that we can possibly provide, and also give them the opportunity to send their plans to DPI for feedback. Not as a punitive measure, of course, but to provide feedback and help them to make it successful. Because these reading camps can really be a very pivotal point for these students if we do them the right way and make them the type of place that kids want to come instead of not coming. So we can see with this chart that students are invited, and over the years the amount of students who were invited has increased, but the amount of students who have come have actually decreased. So that to me says that we need to really ramp up summer reading camps to make it something that students will benefit from, and therefore they'll want to come to, and their parents will want them to come to. The focus on early interventions, this was in the SLA report, and it shows the percentage of students who are falling behind early on. This is the data that we're digging into deeper, and we will provide more information about this at a different point, but we are working to identify those early reading skills and provide targeted systematic instruction for those skills, for building those skills. So our next steps within our division.
Can
Yeah.
you just go back 1 second? I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. So we, based on M-Class, and I'm just reading here now, we have 28 and 24% proficiency at level 3 and above and level 4 and above at the end of first grade.
At the end of first grade.
And by the end of second grade, we're at 27 and 29.
And level 3 and level 4.
Level 3 and level
Correct.
4.
So overall, level 3 and level 4
So-
is considered proficient.
Right.
So if you add those together, you get the 56% total who are proficient in second grade.
So by
And
the
then
end of
52
second
total
grade,
in first grade.
we're making very little progress. We're just barely over a quarter of our kids proficient at the end of second grade after 3 years.
Right.
K-1, 2.
And
So now
then
by the
that
third grade, that
transfers to
key
third.
year, we're, okay.
Exactly. So our next steps are to focus heavy on evidence-based practices and delivering that effective reading instruction. We're working together with partners at Wolfpack Works, and you'll hear more about that next week. I mean, next month, right? The Hill Center training, we provided that for MLTs, and that has transferred into the schools. We're working with including personalized learning trainings for our teachers and for our districts, using learning technologies so that we can implement learning strategies, literacy strategies using technology with any device. So we will have trainers come in and train our consultants to go out into the schools and train the teachers how to do that. We're placing an emphasis on a team approach to analyzing data, a collaborative effort, implementing interventions and strategies, and then developing a standard treatment protocol to intervene as quickly as possible. So that's what Dr. Oxendine was talking about, is what can we do early on to identify those critical skills. Working also to define the core supports that are necessary to help kids vertically, starting with kindergarten, going up through third grade, and integrating the standards, and then providing guidance and support for the reading camps. That's a huge effort. So our reading camp, summer camp, is going to be a critical piece that we can then take out into the schools. And our collaboration with higher ed, I see as a really critical piece to provide opportunities to students. And then just partnering and making sure that parents are staying involved in the process and focusing on our effective reading instruction. So do you have any questions?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Board members, you're just going to have colleagues, you're going to have to indulge me, because I love
Let's go ahead and do a question. Then
reading
I
quickly.
want you to go right into the issue session piece.
Okay.
A couple more minutes on that.
Quickly, couple of things that I'd like to recommend for you to think about. Do you think 90 minutes of instruction is enough? Do we need a 2-hour block to really get into interventions? Number two, at some point, use the term good reading instruction. I would like for the department to define that.
What
I
does
need a
that look like?
picture
Mhm.
in words of what is good, and you might want to change the word good to something else, effective. How does it look? Reading instruction, a definition.
I completely agree. We definitely need that. And we need for every teacher to be able to know what that looks like.
And we need every
See it.
EPP,
And use it.
teacher education candidate, to know it too.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Good
Go
job.
ahead and, let's go ahead and finish the
All right.
issue session slides.
All right, so the issue session, really what I did was take the trend data. You've already seen this in a different format, but this again shows you visually the breakdown of the students over the past 5 years who are not proficient on the beginning of grade, end of grade, or retest. And then the students who have been retained, and the students who have passed using good cause exemptions, and the students who have passed using alternate assessments. So that's kind of the breakdown of Read to Achieve, a trend analysis over the past 5 years. And where we've been and where we're going, we have really focused in on the implementation of the law, providing professional development surrounding that. M-Class in Reading 3D has been used since the law was passed in 2012. And our regional meetings with district leaders have focused on implementation of the law and trainings, providing the teachers knowledge about the assessment and ways that they can use the assessment results to inform instruction. We have an NCAP partnership currently that's going to continue. We are really interested in continuing that because it's a very good venue for the teachers to come for training. Reading camp site visits will continue. They will be more focused, and we will provide data to support what the camps are doing. Instead of just going to see what they're doing, we're going to create checklists that will provide us data. Looking at creating more Canvas courses. There are some virtual Canvas courses that we currently have, but we're creating more because that's the way to reach the teachers. They're not interested as much in a professional development after they have taught all day long as they would be if they could go home and see it in their pajamas or wherever they want to at their own leisure. So providing them that opportunity to have access to this information at a different time in a different place than after they're tired after teaching all day. Wolfpack Works is a huge initiative that we've started. We have our team here today, some of them. Great initiative where we have identified 15 of the highest need schools, and the team is going out and working with our beginning teachers in K2 to provide the best literacy instruction to our students. And that can mushroom into providing the schools with leaders that they can build within their own units. So that's a key thing that we're doing. The Hill Center training has been provided to master literacy trainers, and that is filtering out into our schools as well. We are part of the regional statewide collaborative support, so our consultants will be part of those teams within the regions of the state. We are incorporating lots of personalized learning training. All of our consultants have been trained and are attending the personalized learning sessions here at NCDPI and then taking the information back out. We are doing a huge deep dive into our statewide data to inform our decisions. That's the only way that we can make decisions is to look at the data and see what's going on and then from there move forward. We're focusing a lot on early literacy, those early components, developing the reading camp course that the teachers can use, developing the Literacy Leaders Conference where we'll have a summit, and we're bringing in key leaders from the field. Barbara Foreman and her team from Florida are actually coming to present at that, and so that's going to be a key piece that we can take away lots of information from. And Wolfpack Works will be also joining Barbara Foreman's team to present at that. So key leaders in the field of literacy presenting lots of good information. We also have Learning Technologies Partnership for learning strategies where we can implement these tools on the devices, which is going to be key because teachers need to be able to use the devices that they have for instructional purposes. So that's a good thing to put in their hands and information to give them that they can use for the students. Collaboration with higher ed, like I have already mentioned, is going to be huge. And then we're just going to focus on excellent reading instruction. And I love Dr. Oxendine's suggestion to define that clearly and make sure that everybody knows exactly what that does look like. Questions?
Dr. Galloway, thank you. Let me get any
You're welcome.
questions before we bring up Tripp Stallings from the Friday Institute to continue the discussion. Any questions on the material that all is in the two reports that we'll be voting on tomorrow, but we're laying the groundwork here. Okay, Tripp, come on up. As Tripp comes up, just a quick question.
Yes.
If you could isolate, if you go back, well, don't worry about it. If we think about that chart that looks at where our students are proficient from 2014 to today, we're moving backwards.
Gradually, some parts are moving backwards, some parts are moving forward.
So
EOG scores
so we're
backward.
either flatlined or moving backward.
Right.
What do you see as the highest priority issues that are causing us not to make progress, given all the focus and attention we've had on this?
Focus on our early literacy. Make sure that the teachers have the tools, make sure that they have the resources, make sure that they have the time to be able to do the things that make the difference for students. And providing those foundational reading skills is where it is. If they move forward grade after grade after grade without those foundational reading skills, it will catch up with them. And so that's what we're seeing. The data is showing us that those foundational reading skills were not built back in the early grades. And so by third grade, it's showing up that they're not able to read to learn. They never learned to read, so they can't read to learn.
Dr. Galloway, thank you. Welcome
You're very welcome.
to the department.
Thank
you for all the work you did to put this together. A lot of information in a concise amount of time. Dr. Hsu, thank you.
Absolutely.
I will now bring up Trip Stallings, Dr. Stallings from the Friday Institute, which has been engaged to do the evaluation of Read to Achieve, to share with us the early findings on Read to Achieve and some of the takeaways.
You might notice on your agenda today that I have not one but two solos, and I'm also singing in the chorus on a third song, so I apologize in advance for the number of times you're going to have to hear from me today.
Trip, I've heard you sing. That is so good.
It's not pleasant, so I hope we're not being recorded. I'm also a former world history teacher, but I will refrain from comments on AP's decisions from earlier. I've had a lot to think about this morning.
Stay focused.
I want to thank also Dr. Galloway for her presentation, because it's you'll notice when I go through some of the things I'm sharing with you that a lot of what we have to share resonates quite closely, and that's not by accident. That's because what made our research possible was the tight partnership with the department through a number of leadership changes across several years. And they are not only great partners, but have been very aware of our results. And a lot of what you hear them talking about are reactions to the things that we've been sharing. So our goal always is to share more information about existing policies to see if we can find ways to make them stronger. And I think that we're starting to hear some of that come out. I'm going to give you some additional things by the end of this presentation. At any time, please stop me. I'm going to try to go quickly through the things that would parallel what Dr. Galloway shared, and spend more time lingering on the things that might be newer or different information. I'll give you a quick summary in a minute of all of our results. We'll then talk a little bit about what we see as the gaps between policy and implementation, and then we will also offer some additional suggestions for what could make sense going forward. I'm leading off a lot of presentations with asterisks these days because, as you well know, when you hear from academics, you always get all of the caveats at some point. The level of caveat changes with the quality and depth of the evaluation, and the way that Read to Achieve is set up, it is set up in such a way that we can be very definitive about the results that we have in a way that we normally can't in education. And it's rare that we have a situation like this. So our asterisk is pretty small for this evaluation. There will be other things I'll talk to you about today and in later months where the asterisk is quite large, but I want to emphasize ahead of time how much stronger this type of quantitative estimation is just because of the nature of the Read to Achieve program. We can go into detail if you like. In general, and part of our asterisk is that our cohorts were the 13-14 and 14-15 cohorts. One of the challenges of working with quantitative data is that it takes a while to get it, to clean it, to analyze it, and so we're a couple of years behind, and things have changed since then. But a lot of what we learned is still quite valuable. The statewide impact is null, 1 year out for students in the first two cohorts, and 2 years out. And that resonates closely with what you saw from what Dr. Galloway shared. And I want to tell you who those cohorts are, because we look not just at the ones who go through the entire Read to Achieve process, which means all the fourth grade interventions, the summer camps, things like that. We also take a look at the students who are impacted by the initial policy, which is that notification after the third grade EOG, hey, by the way, you might be retained. So we look at both sets, the students who are impacted by the policy, by the original score, as well as the students who go through the whole process. Our results are true for both of those. Summer camp attendance, not surprisingly, based on what Dr. Galloway shared, does not appear to impact fourth grade outcomes. And this is a positive outcome in a way based on some of the conversations that have taken place today. We believe in practice that right now Read to Achieve is about 115 different pilots operating under a few common parameters. And that sounds like there's a lot of different things happening, and that may not be a good thing. I think it gives the opportunity, though, for identifying the things that are working better in some districts than others. And we weren't able to do that in our research because we only had a limited amount of time and funding, but we've got some ways to do that that we think are quite useful. And we have some initial results that we think are helpful along those lines too. All right, this is just a straight up graph for two different cohorts. On the left you see, on the bottom of each are the third grade reading scores. The vertical line represents the cut point for Read to Achieve. On the vertical axis, you will see their scores on the left for how they performed in fourth grade, their scores on the right for how they performed in fifth grade, 2 years out. And these are for the first two cohorts. What we notice when we just look at the numbers is that students who were initially below the cut point, for instance, I'm looking at the ones from 13-14 who scored a 430, by the time that they finished fifth grade, had increased by about 10 points. They are growing, they are learning, they are improving their reading across time as they should. Students just above the cut point, say at a 440, also increased about 10 points over 2 years. In other words, schools are teaching these kids and helping them improve their reading. What's not happening is that they're not exactly catching up, and that's something that resonates with what Dr. Galloway was sharing earlier. You might notice here on the end that there are some students who appear to be picking up quite a bit. And that's part of our asterisk. Our research was not able, because of the way we were set up, to look at the students who are at the very lowest end of the spectrum. So all we have are raw scores for them. I will give a caution to interpreting those numbers. There are very few students down at that end. So those results from a couple years later are a little harder to say are definitively informative. And they smooth a little bit by the 5th grade anyway. But we do more than just look at the numbers. We also take a look at comparing students who, for the reason that this program is set up in this way that allows us to do this, who, for all intents and purposes, were similar academically before they were impacted by Read to Achieve. This gives us a little stronger ability to say whether or not Read to Achieve is having an impact on their reading. We look in particular, in other words, if without Read to Achieve, would the trends for their scores for these students who were impacted would have been lower without Read to Achieve. So to do that, we look right around the cut point at these students whose scores in 3rd grade were just below and just above the state mandated cut point. When we look at those students and we zoom in, and we do this not just with the raw numbers, but also when we use our statistical analyses to look at them and factor in all the other things that contribute to their outcomes, what we would want to see is something like this. The students on the left are the ones who received Read to Achieve intervention. The students on the right are the ones who didn't, but whose test scores were nearly the same, and therefore academically they were quite similar. We're not seeing that in that core group of kids who represent in some ways an actual experimental group. Students who, both sets of whom could have received interventions, only half of them did, and their scores are not increasing as a result of that intervention. What about the reading camps? You heard a little bit about this earlier. We were particularly interested in those who attended reading camps and were promoted, or those who attended reading camps but were not promoted and were retained. Also, those who did not pass an EOG or alternate but did not attend reading camps. And you heard from Dr. Galloway that quite a few students, and more so over the years, are not attending the camps and then were retained. Whichever group they were in, there was no impact on their level of involvement in their 4th grade scores down the road. So what's going on? You've heard a lot from Dr. Galloway about some things. We want to once again acknowledge our analyses were state level only. When I was presenting to the School Boards Association early last year, a number of school board members came up to me to say to me, you know, we're doing a really good job in our district on Read to Achieve. I'm surprised by these results. And those board members may be right, because we're not looking at what's happening in Avery County versus what's happening in Harnett County. We are missing some of those specific within LEA positives, and that's part of the thing that I think is worth looking at going forward. We're going to suggest a slightly different way of looking at it, though, that's not LEA based, but I'll get to that in a minute. Again, I want to just remind you that our estimates are not for the lowest performing students, so we're not going to say that Read to Achieve has null effects across the board. We're noting that for those students that we can compare, it appears to have no effect. There's one other thing to keep in mind, though. There are some gaps between the policy itself and the implementation. And again, Dr. Galloway touched on some of these. Now, this first one's no longer true, but it was true for the first 2 cohorts. There was no support for pre-3rd grade interventions. That's been partially addressed. I would argue that it could be addressed a lot more, and would second Dr. Galloway's notion that the most important thing you all can consider are those earlier grade interventions. There's also a really broad definition of reading proficiency that suddenly narrows again when you get to 4th and 5th grade, and I'll show you that graphically in a minute. Also, we make a lot of assumptions in the legislation about what the local capacity is for handling this program. And that's not just in terms of the reading instruction ability, it's also in terms of, this has to do with district size too. How many options can I offer students? And that does make a difference. We'll show you in a little bit. On the implementation side, the local camps, there's a lot of difference in how they're handled and how long the students are exposed to them. Again, there's variable capacity in terms of the people involved, but also the funds available to each district. The variations in 4th grade year placement, something Dr. Galloway alluded to, turn out to be quite important, and we think is a really important area for additional research and investigation. and then also the variations in the retained students' experiences. So I want to just focus on a couple of these really quickly. One of them is the broader definition of reading proficiency and why that matters. And then also the variations in the retained student experiences. This is from a couple of years ago, but the numbers are about the same every year. When you first have the EOG administered, about 67,000 students pass it, and they're moving on into 4th grade. About 40,000 then become Read to Achieve eligible because they did not demonstrate proficiency. And then a lot of things happen. There are a lot of different attempts at retests and alternate ways of showing reading achievement, and about half of that group then becomes eligible again for 4th grade and moves on. That group that remains, and it was a little larger this year than it has been in recent years, you then have some students who attend reading camp and in that 3rd wave demonstrate reading proficiency, some who attend reading camp and don't, and they're again retained, and then a group that don't attend reading camp and don't show proficiency. Why this matters, though, is because we go to a lot of lengths between 3rd and 4th grade to define very broadly what reading proficiency looks like. And not only was I a former world history teacher, I'm also an early literacy teacher from way back. And that's important to do. But then we get to 4th grade, and the only thing we use to measure their proficiency again is the first test. So we changed the definition of proficiency for 1 year, and I would argue in a very useful way, but then by the time we get to the end of 4th grade, we've gone back to a very narrow definition. And I'm not sure that that's the best way for us to figure out what's going on. Another one that I want to touch on, and this is one that was a request of this board, so it's particularly of interest to share with you, and I don't know if I've had a chance to share with you guys this one yet. This is the last thing we did. There was questions about the quality of the local assessment and whether or not students who were passed via the local assessment demonstrated different outcomes than those who were passed via other secondary measures. Based on the information we had in front of us, the students who passed via local assessment actually performed better the following year than students who didn't pass at all. So the local assessment does indicate some higher level of reading ability that's not being picked up on. However, relative to all the other students who are passed via an alternate assessment, they don't do nearly as well. There is a qualitative difference in what the local assessment tells us versus what the other alternative assessments tell us. That's hard to unpack because there's 115 local assessments potentially, right? So it's not just a single test here or there, but because this board in particular had asked about that, I wanted to be sure to close that loop with you all. I want to give you an example of the variations in retained student experience, and this has to do with what districts are able to provide. We were fortunate to have a little bit of time and funding left to survey all of the elementary schools that had Read to Achieve eligible students, that is 3rd and 4th grade students. Only about a third responded. That's pretty good, but it's not terrific. And what it means is that we can't say anything definitive, but it begins to give us some insight into what's happening across those schools. Dr. Galloway mentioned the differences in the strategies that the LEAs reported. We wanted to know the within-school strategies that were being used. What you'll notice is if you add up all those numbers there, they add up to more than 100. That's because in some schools, students have multiple placement options. In some schools, they have one placement option. For those of you who have been in the classroom a lot, you understand the value of having multiple placement options for these students. It allows me as a teacher or a principal to make a choice about what the best environment for that student is going to be. That's not an option in every district. In a lot of cases, in some of our districts where we have one elementary school, there simply just isn't enough space or room or teachers there to provide options. That matters. And the outcomes by those placements vary. Now again, I want to caution, the asterisk just got really big. This is just based on the schools who responded to our survey. It's not a random distribution of schools. So we don't stand by these as definitive conclusions. We just propose these as really important things to look at. Placement in a 3rd grade accelerated reading class for this group of schools that responded to our survey was statistically significant and had a positive outcome relative to traditional 3rd grade retention. But keep in mind there were just a handful of students involved in things like this. So we're only posing this as a thing to look at, not that this is the answer yet. What do we recommend happens next? I'm a researcher. We always want more data. That's what we do. In this case, I think we've got a pretty good argument for why we might want to get it. In particular, we need to know a lot more, a lot less about or know more about their test scores. That's plenty of information on the test score side. We want to know a lot more about the implementation data. What is happening in each camp? What is happening in each school? And we're not talking about an extensive amount of data here. We're talking about just 2 or 3 things to help us understand what each Read to Achieve student's experience looks like, so that we can start to piece together the better interventions, the ones that are getting us better results within districts and within schools. The focus on implementation fidelity is always a standard recommendation. As some of you noted, we've got a lot of leeway for districts to how they implement some of this work. We need to know a little bit more about what the parameters might be, where should we tighten up. And then again, identify and scale up local successes. I want to caution, though, against maybe looking at this LEA versus LEA, because that's going to start to confound the things that those LEAs are doing with their resources. So one of the things that we were trying to do towards the end was to look at the different combinations of implementation. For instance, if a student who is retained goes to a 3rd grade accelerated class, whether he or she is in Harnett County or Onslow County, that's an intervention, and we wouldn't look at it at the Harnett County level, we'd look at it at the intervention level. I think you do both, but I think the information is important on both ways, on both sides. What we have done is easily replicable now that we've done the work of setting it up. It's something that we don't personally have to do. We can turn it over to colleagues or even to the department and just show them how to continue this work going forward. It won't take nearly as much effort. And then, again, I'll land on the same place that Dr. Galloway did. Everything we see points to extending and expanding the pre-3rd grade literacy development efforts. Questions or concerns? And I know that was a lot of information. I wanted to keep my time short, so I apologize for moving so quickly.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Questions about either the data or some of the follow-up? Dr. Oxenham.
Just a quick question on the need for additional data on implementation fidelity. That's a worthy suggestion. My question, though, is because we have, through board policy, we've allowed flexibility in the implementation of those reading camps. I don't know how we would define fidelity, because to me those are competing concepts, fidelity and flexibility. And if we had some benchmark in terms of this is the way, some framework benchmark around this is the way the reading camp should look in terms of implementation.
I think there's a different way to think about that, which is just parameters. So right now the parameters are very wide, and if you are going to offer as your placement option for 4th grade a 3rd, 4th accelerated class, that's your local choice. What are some of the components that should be a part of that? I think this is something Dr. Galloway mentioned earlier too. There's a lot of things that we just know should be a part of literacy instruction. So it's less about reducing the amount of choice. There's still that option about what's best for your cohort of teachers and students, and more about what can we share back about some of the things that we know that are more effective or less effective when you choose that option. And you're right, there is that constant push-pull between local flexibility and some kind of state-level control, and I know that hitting the sweet spot is hard. I think there's still some room to work through there. And I couldn't tell you exactly what those should be, just that I think that there's some value in looking right now towards what they could be.
I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to pull up, ask Dr. Anthony Graham to come up from the UNC system. And Julie, are you coming up as well? Julie Quall? Okay. You're going to just be moral support. Dr. Graham is here on behalf of the system. He's chairing the task force looking at implementing the recommendations and findings from the Leading on Literacy report that the UNC system under Dr. Margaret Spelling's leadership did, President Spelling's. Some of you know Dr. Graham from his time as a dean, but he got an increase in his rank and pay, so he's now provost over at Winston-Salem State University, still leading in higher education issues. And Dr. Graham, we appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good morning and Happy New Year to all of you. I am pleased to be here on behalf of the Education Advisory Group at the UNC system level, where we are engaging in conversation around what we can do to help our educator preparation programs become more robust in terms of looking at issues of preparation, particularly in the space of reading achievement. So I will talk a great deal about that here in just a second. I am pleased to co-chair this advisory group with two other individuals, Ann Clark, who's the former superintendent for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public County Schools, and Dr. Marilyn Shear, who's the Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at UNC Wilmington. So I will talk a little bit more about the membership of the group. There are 4 things I want to achieve with you today. The first thing I want to do is share with you the context and the impetus for why this advisory group was formed. The second thing I want to do is help you understand what the charge of the advisory group is, as well as the membership. Who are the individuals across this state who are serving in this capacity to help move our educator preparation programs forward. Then I want to take some time to talk to you about the work that we've done to date, what we've been doing since August of 2018. So we've only been together for a very short period of time, but I want to talk to you about the significant steps that we've taken in that short period of time. And then finally, I want to share with you the next steps for this advisory group. So let me jump in and share with you the context for why this advisory group was formed. During the spring and then leading into the summer of 2017, UNC System President Margaret Spellings commissioned a review of the 14 undergraduate teacher preparation programs in the state of North Carolina, the programs that license bachelor's recipients. She was very concerned about literacy instruction at these educator preparation programs because of the reasons we already know to be true. The anemic and stagnant performance of our P12 students as it relates to their proficiency rates in reading and in mathematics as well. The persistent achievement gaps that have been around for quite some time, particularly amongst subgroups when you begin to look at racial and ethnic subgroups, and we saw some of those data earlier. And then our P12 students' lack of access to educational opportunities. President Spellings felt that in the crosshairs of this or these issues are quality classroom teachers. And who are the individuals or the entities that produce these quality classroom teachers? Our educator preparation programs, particularly given that the UNC institution programs produce the majority of our P12 education teachers in this state. So the concern became, what are we doing in our educator preparation programs to prepare high quality classroom teachers, particularly in the area of literacy and reading? So what she envisioned and then what was actualized is she invited 3 reviewers, experts in reading research and educational policy, who were external to the state of North Carolina. She wanted fresh pairs of eyes, if you will, on this issue in this state. And she asked those individuals to visit each of the 14 UNC systems with educator preparation programs and really engage those institutions in a review of what we are doing from a curriculum standpoint, from a sequencing standpoint, from a depth and breadth standpoint, from an assessment and evaluation standpoint, clinical experiences, so on and so forth. So there were 5 goals that these reviewers were asked to achieve. These are, 1, to understand the current work and contributions of the educator preparation programs. So not addressing the issue from a deficit perspective necessarily, but understanding that the EPPs are adding value. So what value add might there be? But also understanding, number 2, what are some of the challenges that our educator preparation program administrators, faculty, and even the students are experiencing in this preparation space. She wanted to examine how educator preparation programs incorporate the latest research and best practices into their respective programs, and then explore the integration of those evidence-based approaches into the teaching of reading specifically. And then finally, assess the alignment of these approaches with the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. So these were the things that the reviewers were asked to do. The methodology that the reviewers used between August of 2017 and about November of 2017, these 3 reviewers contacted each of the 14 institutions and asked those institutions prior to an on-site visit to provide information about what is occurring in their educator preparations, specifically in the area of reading instruction, but also looking at some broader issues in terms of clinical placements, student teaching experiences, so on and so forth. So before those visits commenced, these reviewers contacted the institutions and asked for course syllabi particularly those course syllabi in the areas of literacy instruction, as well as field placements, early field placements. And then performance outcome data, looking at how our students were performing on licensure examinations, how they may be performing on EdTPA for those institutions that had EdTPA in place at the time, and other common types of metrics. Those reviewers then visited each of the 14 campuses for about a full day. And while on campus, they engaged different audiences. They spent time meeting with the administrators for the educator preparation programs, the deans, the associate deans, the assistant deans, and any other leaders within those units. They spent time meeting with select faculty in the educator preparation programs, not only those individuals housed in the College of Education, but on some campuses, those individuals who might be in arts and sciences, who might be in the College of Agriculture and so forth, who still do work in the educator preparation space. And then they spent time engaging our candidates, a diverse array of candidates, not only those candidates who might be in the College of Education, but again, those candidates who might be in arts and sciences, business, agriculture, so on and so forth. Engaging each of these audiences around those 5 goals that I mentioned earlier. What are the challenges? What are the contributions? What types of evidence-based strategies are you being taught or are you teaching? So on and so forth. Okay. That group, those reviewers, then took time to compile everything that they found as they visited these 14 institutions, engaged the various leaders of these campuses, these educator preparation programs, and they took the information and produced the Leading on Literacy report, which was shared in, I believe, February, perhaps March of 2018. This report identifies opportunities that educator preparation programs have to improve what we do as it relates to preparation of our candidates, particularly in the space of reading instruction. The report also identifies ways that the UNC system can better support the educator preparation programs, particularly the administrators and faculty, as we work to prepare our teacher education candidates for future employment, hopefully in the state of North Carolina, but beyond as well. The report articulated a number of things, but it concluded with 11 recommendations. And I want to, the public school, high school teacher in me, I want to read to you, so please forgive me. But I want to go through each of these recommendations so you'll know exactly what the reviewers asked us to do. Recommendation 1 is encourage educator preparation programs within the UNC system to agree on a limited number of skills that all teachers need to have mastered by day 1 when hired. Number 2, they recommended that we sponsor a colloquia at which recent research is presented and implications for classroom practice are explored. Number 3, that we help EPPs identify successful recruitment strategies for teacher candidates. Number 4, we work with EPPs to review all courses in each program, paying particular attention to the sequencing and depth of literacy courses. Number 5, we help facilitate early, deliberate, scaffolded, and aligned field experiences. Number 6, assist EPPs in incorporating the North Carolina Standard Course of Study more visibly and explicitly into the work of the teacher education candidates. Number 7, we address the challenges posed by the requirement that candidates must pass a series of certification examinations. Number 8, provide opportunities to better understand and utilize the Educator Quality Dashboard. Number 9, provide support to faculty on the implementation of the Educator Teacher Performance Assessment, EdTPA. Number 10, examine new requirements from recently passed legislation and develop a strategy to support EPPs in meeting them. And finally, number 9, establish future studies to examine areas not covered in the Leading on Literacy report. So these were the concrete recommendations offered to the UNC system. And at that point, President Spelling took that information, and one of the other recommendations, actually there were 2 recommendations in the report, additional recommendations. Number 1, that there be an advisory group convened with experts across P12 and across higher education who would then take these recommendations and work to prioritize them and put in place actionable steps. And number two, that there be a liaison hired at the UNC system level, a vice president or associate vice president for P12 strategy and policy. And of course, Julie Cowell has been hired in that capacity. So I want to share with you very quickly what the charge of the Educator Preparation Advisory Group is, and talk to you about the membership of that group. So on the overhead before you, we presented for you the membership listing, so you can get a feel for who's serving on the advisory group. The co-chairs of the group, along with Julie, took a lot of time thinking strategically about who are our P12 representatives and who are the representatives from higher education who should serve on this advisory group. We wanted to make sure that it had diverse representation covering every inch of the state of North Carolina, P12 and higher education, but also looking at differing levels of expertise and experience coming to the table. So whether you're in the P12 sphere, we wanted to make sure that we had board member, school board member representation, that we had principal representation, curriculum facilitator representation. When you get into the higher education space, we wanted to make sure that we had administrator representation from our EPPs, that we had tenured full professors or associate professors, that we had assistant professors who are not yet tenured, that we had student representation in terms of teaching fellows, but we also wanted to make sure that we were looking much more broadly than just what's happening in the state of North Carolina, but we were looking at national policy issues as well. So you will see that there are ex officio members such as Ben Riley, who's with the Deans for Impact. He's the executive director there, or John Denning, who's a program officer with the Gates Foundation. So we wanted to make sure that we're looking at the issues in educator preparation, teacher preparation, development, much more broadly than a localized view, if you will. The charge for this group, quite simply, there are 5 goals that at every meeting we've had since August, we meet once a month for about 4 hours. On the agenda, these goals are on the agenda. We read them. We make sure that we keep these goals at the forefront of the work that we do and that we continue to revisit them. So those goals are quite simply, number 1, we are to examine current data and performance trends to identify key areas of focus. Number 2, we're to develop goals for the educator preparation programs that will signal high expectations, accountability, continuous improvement. Number 3, we're to prioritize strategies that will help move our EPPs to achieve goals with focus on early literacy. Number 4, identify potential partnerships and supports that will advance the work of our educator preparation programs. And finally, mechanisms to oversee and share information about the implementation of these strategies. So the work that we are doing has to turn into action items. One of the things that we wanted to do, and we were very conscientious of this up front, we did not want to lay out a series of actionable items that would be standardized, because we have unique institutions of higher education in the state of North Carolina, which then means we have unique educator preparation programs. Not every program has the same level of capacity. Not every program has the same need or concern. So we wanted to make sure that we took a responsive approach, ensuring that our educator preparation programs could identify areas of focus where they felt they had capacity and need in terms of addressing the work. So we have organized our work teams, if you will, into what we're calling communities of practice. And we are working to identify what those communities of practice are. So as we've been meeting, articulating goals and strategies for the educator preparation programs, really prioritizing those recommendations, what are emerging are the various communities of practice where the educator preparation programs might say, I have interest in working in this space. Or they may say, I have no interest in this particular space, but I choose another space. So I presented you with 4 communities of practice. One of them is an actual community of practice that has formed here recently, which is the Early Learning and Literacy Community of Practice. I'm going to talk a great deal more about that in just a second. But then there are some examples, community of practice. Some examples might be things like laboratory schools. We have, I believe, 6 or 7 institutions of higher education, 5, that have laboratory schools. East Carolina University, UNC Wilmington, UNC Charlotte, Appalachian State, Western Carolina University, with some others perhaps coming on board. Those institutions may choose to join this community of practice, or it may be a subset of those institutions joining that community of practice, working in a very actionable way to think about how are we preparing our teacher education candidates to engage in the work using best practice and research. Clinical practice might be a community of practice. Data and accountability and continuous improvement may be a community of practice. The list may go on and on, but the idea is to provide enough options for an educator preparation program to assess its capacity and assess where the need area is or the need areas are, and then determine which community of practice or which communities of practice might make the most sense for that institution, rather than saying across the board, UNC Wilmington, Winston-Salem State, North Carolina A&T, UNC Greensboro, you're all going to participate in early learning and literacy. That may not be an area of need for a certain institution, or they may not have the capacity, if you will, to participate in that community of practice. I want to zero in just for a moment on the early learning and literacy community of practice, since this is the one that is in progress in terms of forming at this point. This community of practice or coalition is a partnership between the UNC System Office and Deans for Impact. Deans for Impact is a national nonprofit organization that's dedicated to looking at how we transform what we do in teacher education preparation across the nation. One of the major initiatives that Deans for Impact has put in place is a common indicator system. If you know much about educator preparation programs, every program across the nation tends to do its own thing, using the individualized metrics per program. So in the state of North Carolina, you have 14 EPPs, and you have 14 EPPs using their own metrics to look at various issues and concerns. Deans for Impact is saying, no, we need a common indicator system. So this organization is working on working across the nation, across educator preparation programs, articulating common metrics that educator preparation programs would use, which would then allow us to make comparisons and look at insight across the nation, across a diverse array of educator preparation programs, which would then inform the research, literature, and policy, so on and so forth. The second initiative Deans for Impact is engaged in is learning science. And this is where this community of practice comes into play. Deans for Impact published a paper about 2 years ago looking at learning science, and now they're taking that work and narrowing it more specifically on early childhood literacy. What's the learning science in early childhood literacy? How are we looking at the development of literacy? How are we looking at numeracy skills, student agency, and how are all these things emerging and appearing in our educator preparation programs across this great state of North Carolina, particularly given that when you look at where a lot of our early childhood programs may be located on our campuses of our institutions of higher education, there's variance there. There's some campuses that have the early childhood housed in the College of Education, and then there are other institutions where it's housed in other areas. For example, at North Carolina A&T, where I was dean for a little while, childhood literacy or childhood development was housed in our College of Agriculture. So how do we address what's happening with the faculty who teach and engage our teacher candidates in early literacy with our candidates in a College of Agriculture? What are we doing? I'll wrap it up. So what this community of practice is doing is opening to all the EPPs an opportunity to participate in this community of practice with the deadline date of January 25th. There's an all call that's out there. These institutions that will be selected will engage in solutions-focused discussions that will be facilitated by Deans for Impact, looking at what these institutions can do to ensure that the design of their educator preparation programs, curricula, scope and sequence, so on and so forth, makes sense as it relates to what we know about learning science with early childhood development. The next steps for this advisory group will continue to work on the goals and strategies for our educator preparation programs and what we can do to make sure that we're facilitating accountability and what we're doing to look at continuous improvement. We'll continue to engage various audiences similar to this one so that we can make sure we're not just working in a vacuum. We want to share the work that we're doing as well as get feedback and insight into the work that we're doing so we can continue to integrate that into the goals and strategies that we're articulating. We'll continue to prioritize those recommendations so that we're coming up with new communities of practice, and we'll then strategize and execute mechanisms by which the advisory group and the UNC system will share information about the implementation of these efforts. So in a nutshell, there's a lot of work that we're doing. We've done a great deal since August of 2018, and we will continue to do a great deal. I'll entertain any questions that you may have.
Dr. Graham, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if you're okay, if we just take a minute to get any questions. I know we're past time here a little bit.
This is important. This is
questions for Dr. Graham on this presentation, and then we'll just take a couple if there are others on all the issues that we put on the table today. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
And a couple of question and then a comment. One of my questions goes back to a recommendation that has to do with, I don't have the wording, I did jot down the wording, but in essence it had to do with the recommendation around preparing our teacher candidates in the area of reading and literacy based on having some common skill sets. What finding, if you can recall the finding or findings drove that? Because this is a very good recommendation.
And you spoke to this earlier, not having a definition of effective reading instruction, or let me change that, having multiple definitions of effective reading instruction. A great deal of variance across institutions, and even within an institution, a great deal of variance across professors who may define effective reading instruction. What are the parameters of effective reading instruction? How do we know when we see it? What does it look like? We haven't yet defined that in a way that I believe brings everyone to the table and that we're preparing candidates in such a way that it benefits our P12 students once they graduate as classroom teachers. That's what led to that recommendation.
I've read the study, and I'll go back and read it a bit more because I agree with so many of the findings that are contained in that report. I would hope that your group would work with the department. Earlier recommendation I made to Drs. Galloway and Shu is that we come up with a definition of what is good instruction. And I'm old school, so I use the word reading.
Right.
What does effective reading instruction entail? I hope that you will work and collaborate with the department in defining that.
Absolutely.
Because I think that is a need. That from definition you can move to practice.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments, Ms. White?
Just another comment linking back to my previous comment about preparation of the student before arrival in kindergarten. I'm looking at the advisory or the membership list. Was there any reason that our community colleges were not included? I understand that they are not EPP charged with that, but there are almost every community college in our state has an early childhood learning associate certificate, and if we're going to have children prepared to learn in kindergarten, it makes sense that they would be included in some way, some form, some fashion.
Good question. The rationale is exactly what you answered. It's because of the EPP designation, but that does not preclude them from the conversations and the work that we'll be doing. As a matter of fact, as we begin to do outreach and engage different audiences, we will be engaging not only our community college population, but our P12 population, our deans of our educator preparation programs, the different agencies that are doing work in reading across the state of North Carolina. So we're not excluding any group in terms of engaging them in insight into the work that we do. It's just with the membership list, we were set with P12 representation and educator preparation at the UNC system institutions.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Graham, thank you. Thank you for being here
Thank
today and
you.
for the presentation, as
Thank
well as your leadership of this work with the UNC system.
I do have one quick question.
Sure.
Um,
Ms. Chemnitz.
the definition of early learning and literacy, to Ms. White's point, are we talking about, what ages or grade levels does that span? Is that K through,
It's that pre-K through 3.
pre-K through 3?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
JB. This is not a question, this is a comment. First of all, commend you, JB, and the chair and department to attack this challenge. And this presentation is very helpful in terms of being comprehensive. But I just want to remind me and others, this will be a very formidable adversary as we do this. The incremental movement in this area is something we should celebrate, but understand that it's not a win you're going to put on a bumper sticker. It's one of those wins that you've got to continue to push and push and push. I know the work's done in the weeds, but I also want to remind us all that our vision says that our graduates are going to be ready for post-secondary education, careers, and globally engaged and productive citizens. I would argue that there was a time when you could get by with work and citizenry without being able to read, but you can't now. That day's gone. And we as a state have to be passionate about this. We have to be as persistent as we can be. I can tell you that there are homes out there, and Amy, you know some of them. There's not a book in the house, not a book in the house. I love to see how you've broken this out in terms of that instruction and early intervention, but I'll endorse what Amy's talking about. That early intervention is all the way back to birth. Read to them, and I can tell you from testimony, I've read to my grandson in recent times. I'll be glad to show you some pictures if you want to during the break. But I read to my grandson, and when he was 2.5 and said, "Let me read that to you," he couldn't read, but he sure could get into it. He'd tell me the story. And I want to tell you that that's not in every home. It's not every opportunity. I agree with Amy. We've got to focus on that, not just the early childhood education, but we have, every child has to have that opportunity, and it is so important that we focus on that. The other piece is, again, that parental involvement. Parents want to be good parents. We've got to help them. We've got to help them understand. I'll finish with this one. It's somewhat anecdotal, just as reading to my grandson is. In recent months, I went to the funeral of a high school classmate, and I saw another classmate there who I had not seen since graduation, and that's been a few decades. And bottom line is, he's done well. He owns a couple bulldozers and a backhoe, and we talked a little bit about that. He's a bivocational preacher, and we led to a conversation where he said to me, "I can't read. I can't read. My wife has to go to the doctor with me." I said, "How do you preach?" She reads it to me the night before. I memorize it. And for him, the frustration that he's experienced. But one thing he said is, "I couldn't do it today. I could not do it today. I couldn't read the plans when they tell me that where the dozer has to, what it has to do." He said, that's no longer an option to be able to go out there and do that. I just want to say to you that we have to be passionate about this as a state. I don't think we should apologize for trying things that don't work. Input sometimes and Research sometimes will tell us which way to go. I apologize for taking too much time, but I do want to tell you, I'm passionate about this because I have seen it in the face of those who get it, and I've seen the lights come on in that child. I've also seen the frustration in those that have lived a lifetime of just simply not being able to read, and the frustration of not being able to do the kinds of things that are important in life. And that is a globally engaged and productive citizen.
Thank you, Mr. McDevitt. Dr. Graham, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And last comment, Mr.
Not for
Duncan?
Dr. Graham,
Sure.
since you said we may be able to
Please.
discuss the
Yes.
general issues. I've jotted down a list of 5 things that will be important to me to continue to listen to and learn about, and that I think are important. There are other things on the list, but I've knocked it down to 5 for right now. One of them, and this refers to comments made by Dr. Galloway and several of our board members already, the science, medical science shows us that from prenatal to age 3 is when the most brain development occurs. And if we don't figure out a way to incorporate prenatal to 3 into the work that we're doing and become part of that movement to change early childhood development, and early childhood development here is not pre-K, we won't get the kind of dramatic differences that our children ultimately deserve. So I think that's a really huge task, but one we ought to acknowledge as we go forward. Curriculum and instruction is obviously a critical part of reading. On the curriculum part of it, I've constantly heard conflict, and I don't know where this comes out, but I've heard conflict that you have to have this program or you have to have that program. It's the program. And then I've heard on the other side of that, it almost doesn't matter which program you have to have consistency in the program. So there's really 2 very strong thought partners, or not partners in this instance, on this issue. And I'm interested to learn more about where we might be on that in terms of, is it a specific, are there some specific keys unlocked by curriculum, or is consistency even more important? The instruction part of it, thank you to Dr. Graham for lifting up the issue that's long been out there and the work that's being done by so many others, which is how good a job are we doing in higher education in teaching our soon-to-be educators how to be able to teach reading. It's been that again's been an ongoing debate, and if you served on a local school board, you know you've heard those kinds of discussions many a time. And so bringing that out straightforwardly, I think, is very important. And what we can do to facilitate movement in that area that's positive for our kids is something that we all want to get. The other part of instruction that was alluded to briefly by Dr. Galloway had to do with differentiated instruction, which by all accounts is the absolute best classroom teacher you can have, one who can do differentiated instruction. And all the research I've seen, and I really want to be corrected on this, but is about 25% of our teachers have that gift, and it really is a gift. And about 75% don't have that gift. They have areas where they're really strong, but it's not across the board for being able to handle all children across a very differentiated classroom. So if that's true, our goal shouldn't be to, if that's true, and if professional development can't change that equation, then how do we take advantage of the skills of the teachers who may not have that gift but have tremendous skills nonetheless? How do we focus getting them to the right children to be most effective in developing those children? I think that's a challenge going forward. My third point is personalized learning, and that was mentioned by Dr. Galloway as part of the presentation. That's become a very in vogue term in education in the last 3 or 4 years, and I've gotten to the place where I don't know what it means. And I think, and I've actually been reading some things in Education Week, there's been 2 or 3 opinion pieces that talk about don't know what it means, and it's a term that almost is becoming not helpful as opposed to helpful. I think if that's a term we're going to use, it would be helpful just to me, and I may be the only one on the board, to understand how we define that term when we use it. What are we referring to specifically? When we say personalized learning, what are we as a board, or what is we as a department? What is it specifically we're talking about in that regard? Fourth thing is, Dr. Galloway mentioned DIBELS testing. I'm not, and accountability certainly came up. DIBELS testing would indicate, in some of the results I've seen, that our results on end-of-grade tests should be better than they are based on the DIBELS testing that you're looking at. So I'm concerned about what the correlation is between DIBELS testing, which is something that's become very common using in first and second grade and kindergarten. What correlation does that really have to our tests? And that doesn't mean DIBELS testing is not the right one. It may raise questions about our test. But I feel really uninformed about that and would like to get a better understanding about what those correlations are. The fifth area had to do with the reading camps. I sort of looked at that, and I know some parents don't send their children to that camp because it's labeled for failing students, and they don't like that label for their child. And it looked like we were getting roughly 68%. I did this roughly. Roughly 68% of the eligible students were going to the camp, and only about 25% of those were passing. So that meant only about 17% of the students were getting a passing effort out of the camps. I did note from Dr. Stallings' presentation that they appeared to do, the students who went there appeared to do better regardless of the track they were going. They seemed to do slightly better the following year. I have no research to support what I'm about to say, but intuitively what that tells me is that the really important part of maybe our biggest bang for the buck for reading camps would be after kindergarten, after first grade, after second grade, because we all know the loss of retention over the summer is a huge issue for students as they go into this third grade year. And so those camps could perhaps make a huge difference in avoiding the loss of retention and helping the advancement of students who are in some instances catching up. And what the third grade camps do show, I think, perhaps that we should take some positive light out of, subject to further analysis, and Dr. Stallings, I'm sure, will help us with that, is maybe they show that the retention issue is real and you can get some better results even if they don't match up to whatever an accountability test is as a result, that there can be some improvement because there's less loss of retention. So I really appreciate this presentation. These are critically important issues for the children of our state. And I look forward to continuing to engage in discussion on these areas of that topic and others. Thank you for giving me a second to say.
I'm taking notes on what you said because we have next month someone who's going to come talk with us on the early childhood front, some of Ms. White's points and others. Someone's going to be coming talking to us about what other states are doing against some of these very same issues we're seeing, and they're making gains. And then Tara mentioned Dr. Barbara Foreman, who's kind of one of our foremost experts on literacy down from Florida State, will be with us as well to talk about some of these instructional issues and assessment issues that are providing supports or not for teachers. So to the degree that other members have specific areas of focus, concern, wonder, please let me know, and I'll make sure that the folks who are coming next month are geared up to address those issues.
Maybe you said instruction and pre-K in two separate. I assume that crosses at some point because there is that instruction in pre-K as well. I'm assuming that.
Right. Someone who's going to come talk about the role of pre-K and early childhood in the reading by third grade continuum. Last comment.
Last comment, and I'll keep it brief. There's reading extends beyond third grade. We have reading in grades 5 through 12. Our EOG data, and I'm talking very way at the top and very broad and general, but our EOG data has tables that show achievement by spans, like 3 through 8, grades 3 through 8. We have serious gaps past 4th grade. And I contend that some of the gap reasoning widening is probably somewhere after 3rd grade. So we've got to look at reading more broadly than early learning. Very crucial that we begin at that level, very important. We all agree with that. But we've got to look at reading beyond 3rd grade. And it becomes more literature based. So I would hope that part of this issue agenda would get us focused on middle grades reading as well, or upper elementary middle grades reading.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. We'll now proceed to the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy White, and along with Mr. Wayne McDevitt, we do chair the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. Before we talk about our action and our discussion items this morning, I just want to remind board members that there are 2 items on tomorrow's consent agenda for our committee. The first one is Moore Montessori's request to use a weighted lottery, and as a reminder, that's going to allow that school and encourage that school to incorporate more diversity into that student body. And then the second one is EICS 11, and those are the 4 nominations to the North Carolina Virtual Public School Advisory Council. Those 4 names are Ms. Becky Taylor, former State Board of Education member and former owner of multiple Sylvan Learning Centers, now retired. Derek Jordan, Superintendent of Chatham County Schools. Florence Martin, a professor at UNC Charlotte. And Senator Ben Clark is the at-large representative. They're on consent, and we'll vote on those accordingly tomorrow. At the board's approval, we're going to group the items into categories today for smoothness and transition on our agenda. So we have one item that falls under our restart application, and Dr. James Ellerby, I'm looking at EICS 3, will be first on our discussion today. This item is an action item, and as you know, we have had many, many discussions about Wayne County Public Schools. And this is an item that comes to us for action. It was presented to us last month for discussion. I know as late as last week, the Wayne County Board met to tweak some of the items in their application, and it's before us today for consideration for action tomorrow. Dr. Ellerby.
So actually, I am not Dr. Ellerby, but good morning to everyone. I am Maria Petrie Martin, and I do have some opening comments before we head into our presentation today. You do have the restart application that is posted, and of course, it does follow suit with the protocol from previous applications. So you will see there are 8 goals, their flexibilities, and the reasons for restart listed out beginning on page 2, going to page 8. What we will focus on today during our presentation is the alignment of their restart application and North Carolina's restart model with that of the SIG federal model. And that information actually begins on page 8. But what we have done is pulled out that information from the plan, and we do have a few slides that Dr. Ellerby will take you through that does show that alignment. We also have joining us today, if needed, Dr. Michael Wells, who is our Director of Federal Programs. And of course, we know that the SIG federal program is facilitated in his area of work. So he will also be available to respond to any questions specific to the SIG funding and the SIG program. So if there are no questions or comments, I will turn it over to Dr. Ellerby.
I'd like to say good morning to the Chairman Davis, to Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, and the members of the Board of Education. I am James Ellerby with District and Regional Support, and I'm here today to present a short presentation on the resubmission of the updated Restart application for Carver Heights Elementary School, which is located in Wayne County Public Schools. As Dr. Martin has already shared, Carver Heights has a school improvement grant that was awarded in 2017. And with that grant, they're planning to align and use the restart model flexibilities and the requirements from the grant in order to move the school forward. So in the short presentation, the first part that I'd like to go over is that the federal school improvement grant for Carver Heights Elementary School was under the transformation model, which has 9 components. And with the North Carolina Restart application, they are requesting 4 flexibilities. The 4 flexibilities are in budget, it's in calendar, curriculum, and licensure. What I plan to do is, between the 9 components, to highlight some of the parts of the application that also uses the flexibilities that I just described from above. The first part is they looked at their principle from the 9 components of the transformation model, which is a federal, federal grant. And they chose a principal who has a history for turning around low-performing schools. And then that is Dr. Patrice Faison. She's known as the mover and the shaker. One of the highlights of her career was the 19.4% growth in composite that she had with a school that she led, and that was the greatest gain in both the district and the state of North Carolina. We decided as a team to look at some of the strategies that she employed in order to move those schools, and they were under 5 tenets. They are highlighted in the purple there: leadership, data accountability, best instructional practices, professional development, and parent and community involvement. Those strategies are also highlighted and represented in their current Restart model application and their school improvement grant. The second component was under the evaluation system, and they decided to stay with NASUS because they've been getting good results from using that model in order to evaluate teachers, but they are taking it to another level with super evaluations that are also permissible by the state. They are using a curriculum and licensure flexibility in those areas because they want to focus on balanced literacy, as well as use some of the skilled professionals and partnerships that they have with places such as Seymour Johnson, who may have people that specialize like in engineering that can come in and actually tutor and teach some things in math, or some literacy specialists to come in. The other one, the next one is number 3, which are rewards, and this is a budget flexibility. They want to provide bonuses for people that are performing well and implementing the model. It is one, a federal requirement, but it's also a flexibility that we're given from the North Carolina Restart model. Ongoing professional development is a federal requirement, but we're also allowing flexibility within the budget, curricular, and calendar. They are going to use the whole child model, and as you can see the charts here in the room, this approach looks at the whole student, and then the curriculum flexibility is for teachers to be able to come in and receive the additional practices and the support for the best instructional practices, and the calendar flexibility where they're planning to add 5 professional development days for teachers and provide stipends for those teachers to attend those academies and summer institutes and PLCs and after-school trainings. The next one is the recruit and the retain the incentive plan. It's a budget flexibility, and they want to emphasize a master teacher program and pay this master teacher an extra stipend. So that goes under our budget flexibility for the Restart model plan. The next one is the research-based instructional program. They want to utilize, again, the curriculum flexibilities in 2 areas, concentrating in math and literacy with the balanced literacy program approach and a new math teaching program approach. They also want to utilize calendar within their master schedule. The student data use continuously, they want to use formative and summative assessments. It's under the curriculum, and these assessments focus on the growth and the proficiency of the students. The increased time on learning, they want to operate and use calendar flexibility, which one in the master schedule, they have eliminated some of the transitions, which is approximately giving them about 15 additional minutes in the class, and as well as adding 15 minutes prior to school and 15 minutes after school to give a total of between 30 and 45 additional instructional minutes during each day. They also want to make sure that they emphasize on the last component, the family and community engagement, utilizing the licensure and calendar, and as well as any stipends or budget flexibility needed. Under the licensure part, again, with their partnerships and those people that are partnering with the school, they want to have that flexibility to hire and to be able to allow folks to come in and tutor students on any level. The calendar flexibility, again, focuses on additional days and time added to their school calendar. Now, with all of these flexibilities and requirements now being aligned and addressed in their plan, I stand to recommend approval to the State Board of Education to move forward with action on the Carver Heights Elementary School Restart Model Plan by Wayne County Public Schools. Do I have any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Ellaby. Colleagues?
I have a couple of questions. Thank you, Dr. Ellaby. This is a very good presentation. I'm looking at formative and summative assessments. Does the plan call, and I've spoken with the principal, and I think I'm correct in this, but does the plan mention the North Carolina check-ins? Is the school utilizing?
That's been addressed as well, and I did mean to highlight and say the North Carolina check-ins because that's one of the tools that will be used in that. So thank you for that.
Very, very important. And I'm looking at Saturday and Summer Academies. We just heard a couple of presentations, or one in particularly that talked about the need for fidelity with our reading camps, Read to Achieve reading camps. So are the reading camps addressed in the Read to Achieve reading camps addressed in the
Yes, ma'am.
Start application?
Yes, ma'am.
And it would be good to see a little bit more definition in terms of how they plan to implement those reading camps. Since we heard there's a variety of approaches around the state, some work, some don't. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. And I did mean to thank all the other units within our agency who supported making sure that we cover all our bases and especially federal programs who have been a very huge part of this process.
Important to keep that funding.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Okay, any other questions?
Just some clarity on the, this work is good. I think we're at a good place. What's the process on the state improvement grant as it relates to resources or the implementation here?
And I'm going to turn that to Dr. Wells if he would come up and respond to that since it deals directly with the school improvement grant.
Well, I'm sorry, the question was specifically about the grant. Which was the question?
Well, process, this is dependent on resources.
Certainly.
And I'm assuming the resources that we're talking about are the state improvement, the improvement grant.
The school improvement grant?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
School improvement grant.
At this point, what we've done is look at their restart proposal and compare that side to side with requirements for their transformation model, which is what their school improvement grant is related to see if they're still meeting all the federal requirements, and it looks like they are. We've been working with them on some budget amendments and some things to tweak their SIG application to make sure that they can do what they need to do in implementing the SIG grant for one thing, and also this restart model. Couple little best practices things we're working with at the moment. In terms of the funds, there's not anything that looks like it's going to endanger the funds at this point at all. So they should get the same amount of funds they would normally have gotten under SIG for the next 2 years, in addition to the funds that they have this year and some carryover funds from last year. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. No further comments? Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Ellaby, for your work, and Dr. Petrie Martin. I am so sorry that I neglected to recognize you for those initial comments. All right, so that concludes our section on Restart. Let's move to our next sort of category, and that's our ISD reports. We have 2 of those. The first is EICS 2. It's our Innovative School District Annual Report, and I will call Latisa Allen to the podium to give the report and her comments. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning to each of you.
Morning.
So this morning we are asking for approval of the ISD annual report, which is due to the JLEOC on January 15th. It was presented last meeting for discussion. And basically in this annual report, we've covered several components: the background and implementation of the ISD, updates since the last report, ongoing initiatives at Southside Ashpole Elementary, our operator selection process, the evaluation for ISD, and our next steps. The part that you all requested that we amend to the last report was additional information on Southside Ashpole. And so we have done that. I'm sure you have had a chance to review that. And today I have the pleasure of introducing and presenting to you the school leader for Southside Ashpole Elementary School. He comes to us with 22 years of experience in education. He propelled the school to greatness as a leader at Sugar Creek, where they went from 26% to 89% proficiency in their composite score. He also did international work in China, where he started at AP American High School and also was head of school for 2 K-8 schools. So without any further ado, I would like to present Mr. Bruce Major so that he can tell you more about Southside Ashpole Elementary School.
Thank you very much. Good morning to the superintendent, to the school board, and to guests. It's truly an honor to be here before you today to tell you about Southside Ashpole Elementary. In the last 6 months, I've grown to love that school and the students more than almost any placement that I ever have had, and that's not hyperbole. It truly is an amazing school and amazing students. You're going to hear me use that term "amazing" often because it's really true. So I want to show you, start with a picture of the school. And the picture of the school is important because Southside Ashpole has a history and is integrated into that community probably a little bit more than the average school. It used to be 2 schools. Southside was for African American students, Ashpole was for Native American students. In the early 80s they combined, but it's always been an integral part of the neighborhood. Almost every encounter I have with an adult, there's someone who's either matriculated through that school or has had an experience with someone from that school. It's been in high school and middle school as well as in elementary school. I serve at the behest of AAC, Achievement for All Children. I'm pleased that they went through that selection process and chose me there because it truly is an honor to be there. I'm excited every day about going to Southside and interacting with our students and staff. AAC, I'm sure you're familiar with, but they, in the initial stages, supported us with operational support, our curriculum implementation, and they continue to help us with professional development, IT support, financial management, staff recruitment. They're still an integral part of our program, and again, I'm just pleased to be a part of that, part of my association with AAC. But no organization is good without its people, and that's what I'm most proud of at Southside Ashpole Elementary School. It is a unique school, and when I was sitting in China in my living room table debating what my next placement would be as I transitioned back here, I really wanted a new challenge, a new student population, a new challenge to engage in. And I mentioned our student population because it's roughly split 50-50 Native American and African Americans. And that uniqueness that it brings to the school is something that we've integrated and is purposeful as we look at our teachers and our recruitment efforts, as we look at our curriculum and our curriculum implementation. Who's in the building? It's not about implementing a curriculum for our students to fit, it's about what can we do to address the needs of our students. Our students are paramount to every decision, every factor of our daily interactions, where our focus is on our students. And then we're purposeful in our hiring and placing of teachers there to support those efforts. having 15 or 12 instructional teachers, 3 special area teachers, administrative staff that includes myself, office manager, school counselor, instructional coach, and we're fortunate to have a well-seasoned interventionist that works with us also. And we have a school nurse and a school resource officer, but I'll speak specifically about them a little later. So with the assistance from AAC and myself and pulling our team together, we really needed to prepare for our students. What I tell my staff on frequent occasions is that we're new, our curriculum's new, and our administration's new, but our families and students are the same. So how do we prepare to meet their needs? And that started with our before school. Our staff orientation, where we brought our staff in 3 weeks before the start of school, and really focus not only on preparing for the curriculum, but how do we define Southside of Ashepole? What's going to be new and unique for our students this year as opposed to what they've experienced in the past? So we spent a lot of time working, developing the culture and climate of our school. What does it mean to be a Southside Ashepole student and a Southside Ashepole staff member? And so we spent a lot of time doing that. Critical to that process was our school uniforms. Our students had never been in school uniforms before. So again, with the assistance of AAC and Team CFA, they supplied 3 uniforms to all of our students, complete uniforms to all of our students, free of charge. But that's on the surface level, it's just clothing, right? But on a daily basis, we talk about being a family. We talk about being a team. You know, as recently as yesterday, we talked about, you know, cheerleaders wear uniforms, football teams wear uniforms. We're a school, we're a family, we wear uniforms, and how we build that climate and culture in our school. And we talk about open house and community events, but we do open house in a different sense. It's not just open house where it's a one-shot, a one-off occurrence where parents come in and meet their teachers on the traditional sense. We really wanted to move forward in opening our school, that it's a schoolhouse. And remember in the old days when we had a schoolhouse and that schoolhouse played an important role in your school community? Well, that's what Southside Ashepole has always been to that community. And it was important to me that I maintain that our team maintain that sense of a schoolhouse. So that started with just renovating and remodeling our reception area in our school office to make it more welcoming into parents. Having an open environment where parents can come at any time and go into their classrooms and engage, not necessarily engage teachers, but they can engage the atmosphere that's happening at the school. And that's really, really important to us. But not only for parents, but for students and the community also. We wanted school to be a place where students felt that someone cared about them. And that's what we talk about on a constant basis. You know, I ask my teachers, do your students know that you care about them? And they have to tell me how they know that their students care about them, because that's important for us. And then still using that building and using that school as part of the school community. And so the first day of school happened, and we welcomed over 240 bright, shiny, amazing students to our school. And we built a great momentum where students are eager to learn. That was deterred a little bit by the storm, but what spoke to our resolve and what we were able to put in place is that what we call our school restart after 5 weeks of being out of school. It was amazing that next day we had an attendance rate that was surprising. We didn't expect that many students to come back on a Thursday after being out for 5 weeks. But teachers got right back into their routine. Students got right back into their routine because it was something that everybody wanted to be engaged in. So from our school restart and from our development of this program, there's 2 major initiatives that we have for this first year. And one is really just to teach our students. How do we implement the most effective academic program for our students? And also, how do you monitor that progress? How do you ensure that students are mastering the content that you're implementing for them? But almost as equally important to me and to our staff about academics for our students is how do we expand their worldview? Rolling is a very small community, and we wanted to make education not only relevant to our students, but relevant to a worldview, meaning that how do we make school important to them, not only in their daily lives, not only in their community, but in a global sense. And I'll talk a little bit more about how efforts that we're doing to accomplish that. So the first part, of course, is our academics. That's paramount to everything that we have to achieve, is that we have to increase our students' academic proficiency. And so that starts with our curriculum. we've chosen our two main curriculums are core knowledge and our core knowledge for English language arts and Eureka Math for our math programs. But we piggyback that with the core virtues program also. We, again, thinking about our students and the well-roundedness that they need, that we wanted to also, in addition to the academic piece, how do we prepare them to be a global citizen, which also oftentimes involves some of the soft skills that we neglect in our instruction. When we talk about student achievement, we talk about it in two formats. One is proficiency, of course, but also growth. My teachers know, and our staff, that our goal is 100% growth for our students. Every student should obtain growth, adequate growth for this year. And then we have, of course, we have proficiency goals that we have also. The best laid plans require staff who can implement it. So we spend a lot of efforts and a lot of our times and receive a lot of support in developing our teachers and giving them the skills to ensure that our students master that curriculum. But also doing it in an environment that's conducive to learning. That's really, really important to us. The students have to want to learn. You can teach the best lesson, but if the student doesn't want to learn it, he or she's not going to master it, you know, especially when it comes to assessments. So really having an environment that students are encouraged and incentivized for their academics. Data is really important to us, from the top down and from the bottom up. And what I mean by that is we have support from Team CFA and AAC and from ISD that analyzes our data, that pass that data down to our administration. The administration passes it down to students, or to teachers to students and parents. But we also have that same push for data from the bottom up, where students know what their RIT scores are. Students know what their academic growth projections are, and then they're incentivized, encouraged, and challenged to increase and obtain those measures. So we have a heavy data-driven environment that students' progress and student mastery is monitored and tracked on a consistent basis. And we want to ensure that our teachers are implementing that curriculum with fidelity. So again, from some external supports, we have our walkthrough protocols or our support from other organizations that come in and ensure that our teachers are implementing our curriculum with fidelity and receive support services when needed. And the same thing is true for our students too. And our students are supported at each level. Students who are underperforming receive support. Students who are performing at or above grade level are receiving support. And students who are at the higher end also are receiving support. So that we make sure that we're looking at that data, we're looking at our students' needs on an individual level and providing support and programs that meet their needs, again, at their individual level. Our school improvement team, I would say we have two school improvement teams. We have one at the district level that meets monthly with us and talk about our school progress and our academic progress and other areas of our performance that's being monitored throughout the school year. And then we have a school-based school improvement team that has community leaders and teachers representation on that team, and doing that same thing, that's monitoring our progress and monitoring our implementation of our goals. All this is done with some, again, some outside support. We're fortunate as a innovative school district school. We received two school safety school grants, one for a full-time school nurse and one for a resource officer. And I tease those two things out because they're important to us. As a small community, having a full-time school nurse is important to me. I mean, it's one of the questions I asked during my interview. Will the school have a full-time school nurse? Because if kids are sick or parents keep them home, then I can't educate them. So having someone in the school that can address not only those health issues and wellness issues of our students, but also can be a part of our school climate and support system too. And she's been a phenomenal support to our team. And our school resource officer is there, not so much for the enforcement piece, but also for that community engagement piece. Someone who's integrated into the community and who can help families meet any missing resources that those families may have. Working with Southeastern Health System and funded by the Duke Foundation, we have a Healthy Student Grant that comes in and teaches some health and nutrition instruction for our students. And something that we're most proud of, and that's working, that's going to give us, be a tremendous asset to our program, is the 21st Century After School Center program. I mentioned our academics. Our academics program at this point is really focused on the development of those foundation skills. Some of those missing academic skills that our students haven't had an opportunity to experience. With 21st Century Learning Center After School Grant, our focus is going to be on the development of higher order thinking skills and critical thinking skills through project-based learning, and with, specifically with Project Lead the Way, and really having students where students can be creators and innovators in their academic skills. It also has a cultural and enrichment component to it also, and I'll talk more about that also later. Back to assessment. Assessments are really important to us. So in addition to our formative assessments that our teachers are administering to our students, and our curriculum assessments through core knowledge, we do participate in NC check-ins and then MAPS testing. And the difference between why we wanted to use both of those programs, of course, NC check-ins is going to be more aligned with North Carolina EOG assessments, and then MAPS testing will give us more student-specific skill deficits and strengths and weaknesses. And so we can use that for our intervention period, for our interventions for our students there also. All right. Thinking through partnerships, that's helped us get to where we are today. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our continued partnership with the local school district. Robertson County has been amazing in their support of our efforts through child nutrition, transportation, facilities and maintenance, pre-K program, their IT support. That partnership has been phenomenal to our success thus far this school year. We support with, again, AAC, Team CFA, and Leaders Building Leaders in helping what we're describing, or what I'm describing, as our post-instructional outcomes. They're working with our teachers specifically in refining their instruction, and that's an amazing tool, resource for our teachers. And we're super fortunate to work with Dr. Cummings at UNCP, and he's deployed almost his entire staff to help us. I mean, he's committed to the success of Southside Ashpole, from his provost to his dean of education. They're committed to providing tutors for our students, helping us with teacher recruitment, counseling interns. For our teachers, we've actually begun a partnership with UNCP's new teacher training program, where 8 of our teachers will participate in that program. And Dr. Cummings has been amazing in his support of our efforts at Southside Ashpole. And again, I don't want to overlook the community and parent engagement piece to it. And we call it parent engagement, not parent participation, because we want parent support, being respectful of our families and what their the dynamics of their families. And simple things, again, our open house isn't just a one-off event, it's an open school environment. It's a schoolhouse. We had local representatives from local faith-based communities who came together and threw a staff appreciation breakfast for us. Having a fall festival where community volunteers come in and see the school and engage our students and families in a carnival-like atmosphere. Our winter show that's celebrating, again, from a global perspective, holiday season, and different how holiday seasons are celebrated around the world. And then with our students, our staff and the community came together during Christmas sponsorships to sponsor lots of families. And then positive behavior and academic celebrations, that's just, again, one of those tools that we're using to change that, to making school relevant for students and to engage them in our school, and that academics and behaviors are important, is that there are constant celebrations all around our school. Again, cultural and what I call cultural awareness and extended learning opportunities, that's expanding that global worldview for our students. And it's not that, again, our population is about half and half Native American, African American. And so during Native American History Month, of course, we celebrate that. And then African American Month, we'll celebrate that. But it doesn't mean that we neglect our Anglo and our Hispanic students. That history and those cultures are integrated in our curriculum in CKLA and core knowledge. It's integrated all throughout that. But these aren't 1 month activities. It's all throughout the school year. We want our students to be connected to their path so they'll know what have a path to their future. And so our journey continues. I invite each of you to, if you ever find yourself in Eastern North Carolina, to come to, some of you have been there, to come to Roland. Lunch is on me. You'll have an opportunity to eat at one of 2 places, gas station number 1 or gas station number 2. But if you don't find yourself there, I can talk about the school all day long. But it's another thing to see it And so in the absence of being there, I have a short video that I'd like to show that kind of tells us what we've done thus far this school year.
The thing that I'm most excited about is that our students are very eager to learn.
Gail Day didn't miss a word. Perfect. Oh my gosh, I'm giving you a stick like that.
Can you play there?
That says it all.
Well, this just means that you have to come to Roland now. It's okay.
Last question.
James Ford
has left the conference.
Don't take that personally.
I'm perfectly okay. Again, I thank you for your time.
I'll stop when they do that,
Sure,
but
sure,
just
sure.
a quick question. Commend you. This is early on. It's there. I really do hate that you had to have the pause relative to the flooding and how you handled that. Might be a premature question. Are you preparing a long-term sustainability plan? And particularly as it relates to some of the grants, that's a great ratio on a school nurse. 1 to 230 is just great. We're as a state, we're trying to get to 1 to 750 eventually, but even full-time resource officer, all those other grants, after-school programs and all.
Absolutely. So the after-school program itself has a life cycle, and our sustainability is all about growth. Roland at Southside Asheville at one time had a student population in excess of 450 students. You know, and I think as we demonstrate success, success breeds success, and I think we can attract some of those students. The district itself has a school choice option, so you can go to school, you can use transportation. So as we demonstrate success, I'm confident that we'll attract more students to our program, thus additional revenues to support those programs. But we're always open to additional funding from other sources.
Yes.
The thing that I'm most excited about is that our students are very eager to learn.
Gail Day didn't miss a word. Perfect. Oh my gosh, I'm giving you a stick like that.
And you see that excitement in the classrooms when you walk in the classrooms. As teachers prepare lessons, the students are actively engaged in their classrooms. So that's been real exciting for me this year.
As an instructional coach, my role is to support teachers in planning, instruction, and analyzing their data for their classrooms, any resources that I can provide to them so that their instruction is meeting the needs of their students.
I meet with her every other Wednesday, and she just guides us along. We give her copies of our lesson plans on a weekly basis. We touch base with her. It's really amazing, especially for a first-year teacher, to have a mentor right in my school that I can ask any questions.
Always capitalize a name. A proper name is always capitalized.
I like art because the art teacher is cool. She let us try experiments. Like we made slime. We made a self-portrait of our friends. We had to draw their faces. And I like music because Mr. Robinson, he's cool.
We had to do like newspapers, and then like most of ours is about North Carolina and the United States and stuff like that. And there's like little word searches on the bag that we have to fill in. We do little quizzes, and then we try to find stuff on the maps around our rooms and stuff.
All of these children are hungry to learn. They come in ready to learn. And just breaking things down for them with our new curriculum has been amazing, and I have already seen a huge difference for our children.
We have a new curriculum. We have the Eureka Math curriculum for mathematics, and then we have the core knowledge curriculum for ELA and history.
From conception, when we thought about that whole 5-year plan, it was really, really important to me. I talked about the extended learning opportunities that I wanted to engage in students, but a core part of that is cultural awareness. Ms. Chavis, our school counselor, she and I sat down and kind of plotted out activities throughout the year. And we didn't just want to celebrate Native American Month or African American History Month, or just local North Carolina history as any particular pinpoint in time, that we wanted to integrate that throughout the school year.
The first thing that we've kind of had is our first assembly program. The first assembly program was with Native American. It was storytelling. And that was one of the things that we would like to do, is bring in more culture into the school. And so that was one of the things that I did. I provided the assembly program. The people came in from a little big tribe, and they talked about their regalias. They talked about the different dances, and the students did exceptionally well.
I got them dance with them. We had fun, and I like the way we had danced.
Everybody in the environment is trying to do the best for themselves as well as the outcome of the school, because they're here to try to be successful. I have visits because I live right across the road, and talking with the parents, they are supportive of what's going on.
As we connect with families and as we connect with students, and they know how much we care and how important it is, it's not just a job for us, it's a life.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Majors. Are there any more questions in regards to the? Yes.
Ms. Camden.
Just a couple of little quick questions. Out of the instructional staff that you have this year, how many of them are holdovers from the previous year? Was there a big change in your staffing?
Significant change, yes, ma'am. For our 12 instructional staff members, only 2 were former teachers at the school prior to.
Wow. And then the after-school program, what proportion of your kids are attending that after-school program? I'm just out of curiosity.
Yeah, so that program starts Monday. We start that program on Monday, and right now we have about 60 students signed up for the program, but we haven't targeted any specific students yet. It's just been an open enrollment program. We were delayed, one by the storm, and there were some administrative delays with Park and Rec and some of their financing, but we're fully on board. We have a parent meeting tonight at 5:30, and then we'll have our program kickoff on Monday.
Thank you.
Mr. Buxton.
Quick question. This is not for Principal Major. I appreciate the report, and it was a great overview of what you're doing. It's more, I think, for Ms. Allen and maybe Ms. White for you. And this kind of, now that we're kind of your board, what kind of interim, I'm thinking about like a dashboard where over time we might see what the retention of staff is looking like. It would be interesting to know how beginning of year data now looks against some of the interim assessment work you've done, how the after school, and so whether it's supports we're providing to make sure some of the key strategies are being implemented, or just from an accountability perspective, understanding kind of the incremental progress that we're seeing. I don't know if that's an annual thing, if that's a every half year kind of thing. It's certainly not a monthly.
Annually is appropriate, but Ms. Allen may better be able to articulate a response.
Right, so at this point it would be annually. However, there's ongoing progress monitoring and evaluation of the program. And so there have been recent assessments that have been done. The staff are currently looking at that to see how students are progressing. So yes, it will be an annual report. However, there's ongoing progress monitoring to evaluate the success of the school.
Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine.
Just quickly, it's so wonderful to see you again, Mr. Major, and I will be coming to your school soon, and I might have some volunteer students to join me if you're open to that idea.
It would be amazing.
And I'd like to invite you to speak to my MSA students in the very near future.
Absolutely.
It just warms my heart to hear of the good things happening at the school, and it warms my heart even more so to see the video and to hear the kids talk and you can hear the enthusiasm in their voices and you can see it in their eyes. And I'm so pleased, this is just comment, not question, I'm so pleased to hear you speak about the collegiality and the cooperation and the level of support that you're receiving from the home school district, from the public schools of Robeson County, because one would not always expect that to be the type of relationship that would occur between the homeschool and something as innovative as Southside Ashpole.
Absolutely. And I think we maintain that by maintaining the focus on students. And it's, because my students are going to feed into the middle school, and so our efforts are the same.
Very good. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Any other comments from board members? Just in summary, looking back at the PowerPoint, in lieu of the discussions that we've had over the past 3 months about selection of a school and what that means to the school that's actually selected to be placed into the ISD, look at all of the partnerships that have happened. Look at all of the grant funding. Look at all of the work and collaboration that's been put in place to offer not a school, but a student, a child, to be successful, to be a globally prepared citizen. This should tell us we're moving in the right direction. We thank you for being the boots on the ground and for making the 2-hour trip. We know that you have 2 hours back so that you can be prepared for this afternoon. The after-school program, it's an extended learning opportunity, and I wish you great success in recruiting as many students as possible because we know we can control what happens while they're under our care and our supervision. And so let's maximize that time. Good work. Thank you for being.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board members, just to update you, I know you're hungry, but we in sort of a off board discussion, we decided that we would go ahead and cover the second ISD item and go ahead and let Ms. Allen do the EICS 4 Innovative School District Program Evaluation. Yes, EICS 4. And then we have a guest, Mr. Alex Quigley, who is with the CSAB. And I know that's switching over to charter school, but we're going to go ahead and cover that item after her and then break for lunch. Can y'all hang on that long? Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Stallings to come up front. Yes. So Mr. Stallings today is going to present our evaluation design. Of course, this is our first year, and so we are collecting data this year, and the evaluation will be done at the end of this year. So this presentation today is to inform you of the evaluation design for the ISD.
Mr. Stallings, this is your second solo of the day.
This is. So my voice is in good shape. I'm sorry that Principal Major mentioned the 2 gas stations. My understanding is that one of them has the best fried chicken in North Carolina. I am partial to Chicken Kitchen in Chewan County, so I will be happy to go down there and include that as part of my evaluation work. You saw from Principal Major's, Director Major's presentation, there's a lot going on at Ashpole, and as evaluators we want to try to be aware of all of that. Our legislature over the past several years has really come to understand the value of evaluation, and that's a positive. On the other hand, a lot of the requirements for those evaluations are often quantitative only, and that fails to capture some of what's going on in schools. So we have worked to design an evaluation. We partnered with RTI International to spend a year actually with Letisa and Eric and their team figuring out the best way to go about evaluating this program. And we've been able to incorporate all of the elements the legislation requires, but we think we've been able to fold in a few more to give us a little more context about what's happening. I want to remind you all, the ISD evaluation is not an evaluation of Ashpole. That happens to be the first school. It is an evaluation of the policy and the program. So right now, yes, we're going to spend a lot of time in Rowan County, down in Roland, but in Robeson County. But we hope to have other schools that we can take a look at so we can have some comparisons along the way. And we will just see how that unfolds as you all continue your work as well. There's my friend the asterisk again, and for one of the reasons I mentioned, the asterisk for this evaluation is much larger. We have one school. It is, as the director mentioned, a school of choice. That means that the students who were there in previous years may not be the same students who are there now. There are a lot of things that will keep us from being able to say anything definitive about the quantitative outcomes for this particular school. The more schools we fold in, the more we're able to compare. The longer this program goes, the smaller that asterisk gets. But right now, it needs to be pretty large, and I want you all to know that, especially when I come back and talk to you in a couple of months with our first set of results. The evaluation questions were designed in partnership with ISD in an effort to make sure that they reflect and capture all of the things that are required by the legislation for the evaluation, but also allow some room for doing deeper dives where we and they thought it might be important to do so. I'm not going to read them to you. I'll note that they have to do with academic growth, student behavior, community engagement, and then also changes in the culture of schooling overall. You'll note just by the questions themselves that they are not all quantitative in nature. For sure won't read this list to you. This is where all of the legislatively required components fall, and there are some for each of the 4 questions. They're there, it's in your packet, I'll let you read those when you want to. I want to focus a little bit more though on the things we're adding in to try to provide a little more context. So we will try to the extent that we're able to, and I don't know that we'll be able to do it at Ashpole until there are other schools involved, but we want to look not just at school improvement, but also individual student or at least at grade level improvement or changes. When we're looking at learning conditions, we want to take a look at behavior referral, student absenteeism. These are some of the things that came up in the earlier presentation. And also, I know Mr. Buxton talked a little bit about taking a note of whether there's turnover in staff, things of that nature. We're going to try to count those as well as part of what we're doing. I would encourage you to go take a minute or two to look through the presentation at your leisure, or also our report to ISD about our full evaluation plan, and feel free to reach out to me about questions. I have actually with me today 2 members of two different teams. Allison Blackmeyer is here with me. She was one of the people who helped me develop the evaluation plan. And then Lizzie Halstead is going to be down there eating chicken with me as we start to learn more about Ashpole. Okay. Again, to reflect our efforts to get more than just test data, we want to take a look at all the different things that we're going to be looking at, always the administrative data, but also student surveys. Some of you may be a bit surprised that we would put a lot of emphasis on student surveys, especially for young elementary students. In my experience, and I've been doing this for a long time now, we often get the best and most accurate reflections from kids. They're very honest on surveys. I don't know that we'll do focus groups with them. We have done that in the past. We learn a lot from those that we don't pick up from other things. We want to hear from the parents. They're an incredibly important part of this component, as you heard. Also the practitioners themselves, and then we'll do some focus group work down there as well. In addition, and this addresses another question that came up. Actually, this might have been your question, JB. I might have misplaced it. We have talked to ISD about what might go into each school's annual report. There are plenty of things that have to be reported. There are other things that we'd like to know. And so we are still talking through with them what seems reasonable and useful matched up against how much else these schools have to do. We don't want to overburden them, but we do want to continue our conversation with ISD about things that might be good to include in annual or semi-annual reports. Your input on that would be welcome as well. I want to touch the quantitative side of this just for a minute so you know what we've done here. And we brought in a number of different external experts to think through this because it is a very challenging quantitative evaluation. We can obviously just report changes in test scores. That's something anybody can do. We want to do a little bit more than that. Where our panel settled on was a comparative interrupted time series. You don't have to know what that means. I'm going to show you how it works though. We worked to find other schools that look like Ashpole or the other ISD schools that will come on for all of the years leading up to the beginning of the initiative. And what look like means, there's a lot of different ways we're going to define that, but we're going to be wrestling this spring with how to find those best matches. And that's a little bit of a challenge, especially because of something I noted earlier about the turnover in students. But what happens then is after, and so we get measures for all those things at each year along the route leading up to the change. This is where ISD comes in. And then we take a look at what happens to different types of schools in the years that follow. With school type A being an ISD school. School type B perhaps being an I-zone school. School type C perhaps being another type of restart school or a school with no interventions at all. We want to have a number of different ways to compare in the years that follow what happens in the ISD schools. Now, the value of setting this up this way as part of our evaluation, we're only going to be able to get through 2019-20. But you are going to want to continue to hear and see results after that. And so just as with Read to Achieve, we want to leave you with an evaluation that is replicable in the years to come to continue to learn what you need to learn after we step aside. Lots of caveats. It's a small number of schools, and one being the smallest number of schools you can have right now. There will be differences in the governance across those schools, or possibly so, because of the nature of how you identify who runs those schools. And this is why we emphasize evaluating the presence of the policy rather than evaluating the individual school, because every school is going to unfold slightly differently. The timeline is very restrictive. That's always the case, and that's why we want to leave you with something that you can continue to do after we step aside. The lack of randomization is the most significant challenge, though. We know the value of having choice for these schools. It's very important for parents to be able to decide to place kids in these schools. We would never recommend a change to that approach. It does curtail a little bit how strongly we can manage the quantitative evaluation. And again, one of the major reasons there is because the students who are currently at Ashpole are going to look different from the students who were there a year or two ago. We're going to have to figure out with each ISD school how different the population is before we start to make quantitative estimations. I wanted to note, just I said it earlier, that to the extent that any district decides to take advantage of the opportunity to open iZone schools, it's very likely that those can be some of the comparison schools that we use. I don't know that Robson has made that decision yet. I don't know what their timeline is. We'll see. So we'll keep our ears and eyes open. Whoops, and I felt like I skipped something. No, that might have been all I had. I was trying to keep it short because I knew it was going to hold you from lunch. That's where we are right now. We're starting we'll be starting our trek down to Robeson County this spring. Right now, Lizzie and Laura, one of my other team members, and I are starting the process of developing our tools that we'll use when we hit the ground running. And we hope to have some things to share with you qualitatively after this first school year. Quantitatively, it's going to take a little bit longer, and we want to proceed very cautiously, not only because of the challenges quantitatively, but because we know just how many eyes are taking a look at this, and we want to be as careful as we can be. That's what I got.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks. Board members, colleagues, questions? So Mr.
I have a context question that's regarding future. Help me with the most recent legislation and the statutory requirements for numbers of schools and when. I think we are, our earlier decision today around Restart changes that that sequential piece of this. I think the statutory requirement is 5.
Yes.
By when?
Up to 5.
Next school year, the 2020.
We have to identify 4 next year.
So at the end of next year, there's to be 5.
The selection of the.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And then they start the following year. So there are 4 next year. I just remind us all what JB said earlier. We're the school board for those as it moves forward. So that's an important piece given what we just have gone through.
I want to note too, to that point, we would consider as evaluators those 4 schools to be quite different from the first one, because they will have the experience of the first one to learn from. So we would try to treat them a little differently. We'll combine them all if we get them, but we also want to treat them a little differently when we get to the quantitative component.
Any additional questions? Mr. Stallings, thank you so much for being here. And no concrete data as of yet, but at least a framework for evaluation moving forward. Effective, aligned. Can't remember the third bullet that we discussed last month, but effective and aligned. So thank you for helping us take a hard look.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, that concludes our ISD items. Thank you so much, Ms. Allen, for being here today to walk us through that. We're going to tackle one of our charter school issues just so that Mr. Quigley won't have to stay here an additional hour. It's EICS 9, the 2018 Charter School Acceleration Application Recommendations. Mr. Quigley, thanks so much for representing CSAP today. And helping us better understand what's coming before you the next month.
Thank you, Ms. White.
Yes,
and I appreciate getting the time so I can go back to school. This is kind of this is a unique situation, partially due to the weather issues that we faced in December. And then also we have a much higher number of acceleration requests this year than we have seen before. So I thought I would just, Director Machado asked me to come and kind of talk you all through this and ask you any questions. So essentially, we are going to see all of the schools, and in your packet you'll see they're listed there in the accompanying materials for this item. And we're going to see all the schools that have requested acceleration that were approved for a full interview next week. And if we approve those schools to move forward, or we recommend them for approval, we would like you in February, at your February meeting, to approve those schools on action on first read. And the reason for that is that these are schools that are slated to, that would be, if approved for acceleration, would open in the fall of 2019. So they would be opening very soon. And it is very difficult to recruit students if you're not able to start that process until March. So we wanted to kind of preempt any questions and concerns and let you know that if for these accelerated schools, if we move them forward as an acceleration, we're going to look for the action in first read, which I know is not something that you normally do, particularly with the charter school applications. A couple of points around this. One, just because they've applied for acceleration doesn't mean that we will approve them for acceleration. So, and we've talked about this at the board level, we're actually making two decisions now. One, it's are we moving this school forward and making a recommendation to you all that they become a charter school? And two, what is the timeline given their request? So that timeline, we might say, yes, we think this is a strong application, strong board, but the challenges that they're facing are really insurmountable in the time that they have, or that they're close to meeting the criteria for acceleration, but they're not quite there, or so one of them is around facility. Now, people that have asked for acceleration, there's varying degrees at which they justify that they're equipped with a facility. One, for example, is an existing school that's already operating. This is a private school. They already have a facility ready and operating, obviously. That's different than a school that just, applicant that just says, we've identified a facility and it's ready to go. So there's kind of varying degrees, and we're going to evaluate all those aspects really carefully. And I've talked with our board and tried to impress upon the board that these are two distinct decisions, and they're both really, really important, and we're going to take them very seriously. So my goal is that if we vote to move a school forward with acceleration, we're saying to you, we feel very confident that they're going to be able to open on time and do so with this targeted student numbers, within the ballpark of this targeted student numbers that they've outlined in their charter grant or charter proposal.
So, Mr. Quigley, I'm going to summarize what I'm seeing here and combine that with what you've said. There were 14 schools that applied for acceleration, and acceleration means being ready to open in the fall of this year. It's January. Okay. Of those 14, 4 were not recommended for an interview. They did not meet the qualifications as designed by CSAB. So there are 10 schools that have been invited to have an interview.
Your conference is ending now. Please.
Of those 10, some may be brought back to us next month for action on first read, and the reason for that action on first read is because by February they will only have March, April, May, June, July ready to start in August. Just so with that clarification, are there any? This is your time to ask questions for Mr. Quigley.
I have a couple other additional details. So some of the folks that are applied for acceleration have applied before, and so they had already put together an application and started some of the legwork associated with opening a charter school, and they're further along than an applicant that this is their first time up to the plate for this process. Additionally, you know, we do have some schools that this is the first application and they are requesting acceleration. Part of certifying that you want to be an accelerated school, and Dave can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm quite certain that they have to start attending the Ready to Open sessions that the Office of Charter Schools conducts over the course of the year. So these folks have already actually been attending, and we have documentation that they've been attending the Ready to Open sessions, again, so that they can, so we feel more comfortable with them potentially being accelerated.
Any comments, questions? Mr. Duncan?
What are the statutory requirements, if any, that govern a request for acceleration or the timing of opening, just so we can place this better in the framework of what's required under the law?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know all of the points off the top of my head. I'm not sure if Eric has that pulled up, but one of them is facility. One is a serious need that kind of, so for example, a school, if it was the first charter school in a county, and there was, they were able to show evidence of a significance of need that is greater than what we would normally see. They have a facility secured and they're able to open in the short timeline. And I'm not, are there any ones that I'm missing? Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any, really what I was trying to get at, and that was not well framed, was there a timeline that's set out by statute that it's supposed to be?
The timeline, I believe,
going outside the timeline.
Right. I believe the timeline is set out, you know, we kind of set the timeline for the application process, and you all approve that, and then kind of, but essentially it's a 2-year process that with the application in the September, approvals, you know, by the spring of that year, and then they have a whole nother year before they open. That's the traditional timeline.
So the request by these groups would be for the board to waive its policy with respect to the timeline.
Well, I believe the acceleration is an existing board policy, so it's something to encourage, you know, strong potential charter schools that could open in a shorter timeline. So it's the application of a policy that is available to the board.
Thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate that.
Mr. McDevitt.
You mentioned that one of these applicants is a conversion. We've had very few conversions in the state. I think maybe just one, maybe a second applicant that was not approved.
We had one recently, I believe, that opened this year.
So, my question is there a separate process, or are there separate requirements regarding a conversion relative to a startup charter, a new charter? There's basically, they have to identify that they're a charter school conversion in the process, but they go through the regular process with our board as would any other applicant. And I think they would have to convert there may be ways that they're doing things that they would have to change by the time they applied to our board, but as per the process, they have to note that they're a conversion, and then we take them through the exact same steps. We kind of treat them as any applicant. So would they have to their lottery?
Yes. So they would, as a charter school, they would have to. All of the students have to lottery into the school. So, or of course, some schools have open enrollment where if there's not, but yes, you have to lottery all students into the school when they become a charter.
Okay, without any further questions, thank you so much for the opportunity to walk us through that.
The book time's a good look.
I'll turn it over to Chair Davis.
Yeah, so it's 1:05. We'll break for lunch till 1:45. So let's be back ready to go at 1:45.
Accelerate.